Good evening, everybody. It's been about a month since our Politics of Middle Earth stream. That was last time. We'll probably do a follow up to that at some point, but that is not the topic of this evening. So we're back. It is October 16th, the year of our Lord, 2022. We have an interesting topic tonight, one that is rather relevant, especially if you have been in the Twitter political spheres lately. There's been a hashtag MAGA communism, which is interesting. So I think that is relevant with a topic that I've been wanting to do for a long time, which is how socialist is Donald Trump. And I know there's going to be a bit of a debate here between us this evening. We got a newcomer here. We'll introduce him momentarily. But just in the meantime, of course, as we always start out, we will do rounds counterclockwise. Introductions. So how are you doing this evening, Ms. Izzy in Chicago?
I'm doing well. Published something the other day, already 11 pages into the next one.
Substack?
Yep.
Oh boy. Well, good to have you on again. Darth Kilhoun, my probably official co-host at this point, I'm not going to lie. How are you doing?
Doing just fine. I didn't really have a stake in this topic, but it's it's going to be interesting to throw my 2 cents in.
Especially as a conservative anti-capitalist on your end. Very different than a lot of other conservative anti-capitalists, but I don't know if you want to elaborate on your more monarchist stance, what your economic position would be.
Well, I would consider myself in the school of the conservative revolutionaries, like in Germany, where I am ideologically a monarchist and generally a reactionary. But I have very left-wing anti-capitalist, but also just generally anti-consumerist economics, and I prefer
environmentalism, right?
Yes, which includes that, but more with like a feudalistic strand, and not like the cringe neo-environmentalists who want the comfort of modern day life, but not essentially all the earth destroying things with it. But they want to live in a utopia. Well, I want to live in realism, which would be feudalism if you want a green planet.
So yeah, I think the environmental aspect, if I understand his position, that's probably going to be the main area where you disagree with our next guest, newcomer, Aidan Stone. He considers himself a MAGA communist, quote unquote. That's the term that they're using. I think it was Jackson Hinkle who popularized it on Tucker, or was it OAN? It was one of the two, but so definitely more pro-industrialization than you are. But Aidan, newcomer, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself? Just what you do, what you believe, more or less what you advocate for, and what you hope to get out of the stream?
Sure. I am Aidan Stone, Marxist, Leninist, Hazist, 100% Stalinist, 100% Maoist. I'm here to defend MAGA communism and anti-environmentalist.
Short, sweet, simple, to the point. And now, last but not least, academic agent's favorite adversary, Ray Murasami.
I can't believe he's still... Well, at any rate. Yeah,
I think he's in love with you, Ray.
I mean, more like the opposite of that. I think I'm probably the person he hates the most on this planet, given the number of times he's tried to come up with increasingly harebrained ways to like come after me in bizarre fashion, and it's never once succeeded.
He told me he has you on for entertainment. Entertainment value.
Well, I mean, he presently has. He's had me on ban for the last 3 years because apparently I am. What was the words he used? I am too dangerous, I think he said. So no, it's the opposite of that. Yeah, apparently I'm so dangerous that I'm literally banned for the past 3 years from like appearing on any of his like stuff, and all of his associates also have me kind of like blacklisted because I might go on there and like say something that is in some way injurious to neoliberalism, and so they can't be having that. Incredible. And the thing is, it's not even like during that time period that I was actually pushing back particularly hard, but apparently it was too much for them. So introduction anyway. So the same introduction as you always, cultural commentator and political analyst from the perspective of the socialist third worldism tendency. Also Pan-Asianism, still doing that. And obviously since 2020 and 2021, all the events that's been happening among the Asian diaspora, I've sort of made this sort of inward turn where I've been increasingly leaning toward conversations about Pan-Asianism and about the state of Asian diaspora in the West at the moment, which is why you notice my Twitter account has taken this sort of turn in that direction. So I've actually been tweeting less foreign policy and more domestic crime fighting tweets as that situation has kind of like come to a head. Most of it is, quote, politically incorrect because liberals don't like when I talk. You guys may be familiar with that. So there's that. Also, I decided to come on today because, well, obviously because you all invited, obviously because Politico invited me, but also because I knew that Aiden would be coming on, and I haven't actually spoken to anyone who believes in MAGA communism yet, so I figured it would be an interesting idea to like appear at a stream where there was such a person.
It's because
see what
it's
happens.
I'm here.
It's because it's interesting, Ray. So I know you're not a MAGA person, but a lot of your
Absolutely
policies seem very in line with the non-Trump related things of the MAGA left or MAGA communism. Say again, Gadsden communism.
Depends on which things you are thinking about, because I kind of feel like the entire economic program, I'm not going to agree with it, considering the entire economic program is kind of like leveraged against us. But we'll get to that.
So I mean, I want to ask just before we get started, so we're all on the same page. And again, I feel like it would be to talk to Haas or Jackson Hinkle or somebody will be definitely a goal within the next couple months with me. But Aiden, just so you can kind of lay out what MAGA communism, as you call it, is all about.
Or yeah, I mean, I agree he should go first. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want you to lay out what the platform is. How is it fundamentally Marxist, especially when Marxism, I guess, tends to be a little more internationalist, and I know you can definitely apply it to more nationalistic ways. But why Donald Trump specifically? Is it because there's that hardcore populist right element that is definitely stronger than like the quote unquote like cucked populist left these days? Is it a pragmatic strategy, or why Donald Trump specifically, and why not someone like Bernie Sanders or even like Ron DeSantis?
Okay, well, I mean, it is pragmatic. I don't know if I'd necessarily say pragmatic as much as it's materialist, as on Twitter, people like to argue about all these made-up ideologies and, get their own little personalized ideology that this is what I believe. But in material reality, yeah, you're either with Trump or you're with Biden. And we are the communists who are saying, no, we're with Trump, because it's just as you said. We are populists, and the populists right now are on the right. There was a chance for a populist democratic movement with Bernie, but he completely cucked himself to the Democratic Party. After these WikiLeaks emails came out that showed indisputably that he was getting rat-fucked by the Clinton campaign, he went out and campaigned for her. After that, imagine if that had happened to Trump. You think Trump would have put up with that shit?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. That's why we're with Trump. And I mean, yeah, I could argue ideologically, there are things I disagree with Trump, but you've got to take a side. I mean, we don't want this to be another internet ideology. We want this to be a material political force. And to do that, you've got to pick a side. And we're picking the side of Trump.
I've said this in the past. I think, honestly, like a Bernie Sanders, Donald Trump ticket would be the most powerful ticket and the most unifying ticket in the United States.
I completely agree with you. But the thing is, Bernie would never have done it. I think Trump would have done it. Bernie wouldn't have done it. And that's why, I mean, I think that was the last chance of the Democrats to have a populist base was with Bernie. And he, as an individual, destroyed it. And now you see his sort of proteges, which is the squad, like AOC and Ilhan Omar Rashid Tlaib.
They're cucking to neoliberalism. That's basically what they're doing.
This video just went viral of a couple of the LaRouche people screaming at AOC, saying that she's supporting Nazis in Ukraine, which is true. And the reason that went viral is because people recognize this. Yeah, the Democratic populist left is a complete fraud, and we're not trying to ideologically manipulate anyone. We're trying to meet people where they're at. And where people are at right now is they support Trump. And there are certainly things I support about Trump. There are things I disagree with him about. But he is, like, populism today in America is Trump. It is MAGA. And we've seem to be the only people calling ourselves communists who have recognized this, frankly, rather obvious fact. I mean, the so-called communist parties out there, like the CPUSA and the PSL, they're going to fucking Democrat abortion rallies and campaigning for the Democrats, and we're the ones out here saying no. I mean, what I would say is that MAGA is already communist. Maybe not
Interesting.
ideologically.
Okay, that's essentially what we're going to be getting at tonight with the discussion. Because I mean, I'm of the view, and I know you and I probably, you're more like from an analytical perspective, you and I agree, but from an ideological perspective, because I'm a libertarian, you and I would disagree on this. But
You might be surprised.
I do think Trump is fundamentally a socialist.
Do you want me to respond to that, or someone else want to talk first?
Well, no, I was just going to say that's what we're going to be discussing going forward, but I just wanted to put that like kind of preliminary statement out there. So, yeah.
So just as a little commentary, I personally believe that post the fall of the Soviet Union, kind of communists and capitalists kind of lost the distinction that they used to have. And today, like, I mean, look at communist China. It's like, can you really say like they're a Marxist state? It's like they have state-owned industries owned by the Communist Party, but like they operate in a semi-capitalistic model. And then here in the West, you're seeing like the erosion of like the free market ideal. So it's like they're kind of merging and blending, and kind of they are losing their distinction. And it doesn't really matter at the end of the day too. Like it just matters on what the state needs to do.
Okay, that makes sense. Ray, how would you respond to that? Because I know you.
Well, I mean, I have two responses already.
I just want to say real quick, you're on the left, but you're like a weird leftist compared to like Americans, because you're like a third worldist, Maoist, whatever.
Well, I mean, I suspect that Aiden is not going to be surprised by my first question then, which is, and I'm just going to put the two questions together so you can answer them both at once. But what would he say to people who would remark that if he wanted to build socialism, the thing that he should have done is actually not choose either the Republicans or the Democrats, but actually try to build an independent platform so that you don't end up tailing either of these two parties, who may just lead you back into whatever their interest groups that control the party are all about.
Ross Perot, kind of.
Perhaps. I mean, since he is the one overtly claiming to be deliberately trying to follow a Marxian path, right? Bear in mind, I'm not bound to this same thing, you see. So I could hypothetically do anything else. But since he has bound himself to that, right? How does he escape the precedent set that people will be talking about, such as, for example, in the October Revolution, where they're going to argue that none of the people who he would be reading from the texts would have advocated for doing the thing that he is presently doing, because all of them chose to not participate in the parliamentary democracy and instead went on to do something entirely different. Mm-hmm. And also, the second question also goes with that as well, which is, I guess, the accompanying part of the question is that even if that was something that everyone was okay with, let's just pretend there was no opposition to what Aiden had said there, even if everyone was in support of it, when he says that people support Trump and that populism is where Trump is at, like, what is the percentage of the United States that actually voted for him at the previous election, and the percentage that still supports him now? The percentage that still supports him now would probably be less than the amount that supported him at the previous election. But if that's like less than 23% of the population, then that's not where it's at, is it?
And we also need to remember that, and Damnation is one of them, and that's why I wanted to have him on. But
Damnation walked away, didn't he?
I mean, I'm just saying, over 1/5 of the Bernie supporters in 2016 voted for Donald Trump.
Yeah, but I mean, sure, but I mean,
Can I respond to this?
As a proportion of the whole country, though, they're not that many.
I'm sorry, what were you saying, Aiden?
Can I respond to the?
Yeah, go ahead.
Question? Okay. First of all, I want to address the overall subject of this conversation, which is Donald Trump a socialist? I think this is sort of false. I think Darth Calhoun kind of alluded to this, that this communist-capitalist distinction isn't really as meaningful as it was when it was referring to Soviet bloc and Anglo-American bloc, because we live in socialism, is one of Haas's theses that I subscribe to. So we already have a socialist economy. So whether you want to call Donald Trump like some sort of voluntarist socialist, is kind of irrelevant. Socialism and capitalism are not referring to ideologies. They're referring to material economic systems. And these aren't things that can be voluntarily intervened on. We live in socialism whether we like it or not, is my take on the overall question. Now, you had two
let
questions.
me push back for like a brief second. Sorry to cut you off there, but I would say that's right for capitalism, because capitalism is really just a series of, whether you like it or not, it's just a series of economic exchanges. It's less of an ideology, but there's definitely more of an ideological element to communism as opposed to capitalism. Like, nobody really identifies as a capitalist ideologically, whereas a communist would.
Well, like capitalism also runs hand in hand with liberalism most of the time.
Yeah. Well, economic liberalism is what capitalism. Anyway, let Aiden keep talking.
All right. Now,
so that was my bad
you had two questions. The first was about electoralism and why a Marxist would support electoralism. Now, what Lenin wrote about electoralism was that we should support candidates for the purpose, because he didn't view electoralism as an actual legitimate path to political power, because it's completely controlled by the ruling class. But it has legitimacy in the United States today. People believe their vote counts, and you can't just like debate people in the marketplace of ideas and be like, oh no, actually, you need to demonstrate to them in reality, no, like we do not actually live in a democracy. And supporting a candidate like Trump, a populist candidate who's opposed by the ruling class, is a way of demonstrating the illegitimacy of the bourgeois electoral system. And this has already happened. I don't know how much I can talk about this on YouTube, but I think you guys know what I'm referring to. And it's, whatever theory you have about these elections, in reality, people are starting to question the legitimacy of the system, which is the Leninist line. And
you see, this is exactly where Kilhoun and I talk. Oh, sorry.
The second question, your second question was about can you remind me?
Percentage of people in the U.S. who actually supported Trump in the first place.
Right, percentage of people. Well, it's not necessarily about percentage of people. It's about which people. Because I'm a Marxist, I have a class analysis. And first of all, 74 million people voted for Trump in 2020, which is about a third of the population. Most people don't vote, so I would imagine more people than that are sympathetic to Trump. And of the people who don't vote, a lot of them are going to be working class, because election day is not a holiday. Some people have to work all day; they can't vote.
I could vote.
And a lot of people are rightfully disillusioned with our electoral system and don't vote for that reason, and maybe sympathetic to Trump. So I would estimate that the country is split 50-50. You have the MAGA people and you have the Democrats. Now, what's important is that Trump gained support and was brought into significance by what was the industrial, traditional Marxist working class. And they supported Trump because he said he was going to bring the jobs back. He said he was going to reindustrialize.
From where?
From Mexico, from that were outsourced under NAFTA, from Vietnam and China. And
so this is my next question, actually, the third question. The third question is, if you're cultivating the kind of people, like, would you subscribe to the view, or would you agree to the view that the kind of people we're talking about who let's say that I accept completely that there's a silent support for Trump, and that, there were some of the people who went out to vote.
They're very loud.
No, by silence, I mean people who didn't actually vote, but yet still continue to support him. Let's say I accept Aiden's argument on that, but then we also look at like Nate Silver's figures, where he claimed that the people who actually did go out and put their ballots into the box were like a large number of them were like small business owners who are making greater than $70,000 a year, for example, right? Do you accept, Aiden, that those people existed amongst that?
For sure, I accept there's what we would call the petit bourgeois component to Trump to Trump's support. And
what if I expanded on that and also said that the people you said who were working class who voted for Trump because they wanted to, quote, bring the jobs back, what would you say if I were to say there's a large contingent of people who believe that they are the labor aristocracy? In other words, the people who want to wage war against other members of the working class in other countries, such as we mentioned just now, Mexico, China, Vietnam, South Korea, the whole of Southeast Asia, parts of the Middle East that are now beginning to industrialize, India, and so on and so forth. So when you say MAGA communism, for example, which assumes that there's this kind of internationalist solidarity of the working class, and obviously the idea of the development of productive forces in order to make sure that we end up with the creation of the preconditions for socialism. How do you on the one hand reconcile wanting to create the preconditions for socialism by allowing industrialization to happen, but at the same time also relying on the support of people who electorally wanted to hamstring and sabotage the places where that industrialization is occurring, so long as those people happen to be brown? You see what I mean?
There's a couple elements to this answer. You mentioned war against the international working class, but who is the, if you want to talk materially, who is the most anti-war contingent in American politics? It's MAGA.
I don't mean physical war. I mean economic war at first. Because think about it, those MAGA people came out and they effectively through their pronunciation said, no, this is not a hypothetical though. They spent a lot of time saying that China was the enemy and that they wanted to essentially engage in the raising of tariffs against China to prevent its development and so on and so forth. And this is snowballed to the point where Biden's policy right now in 2022 is identical to what Trump's was at that same time, almost as if the ruling class in the United States is united on the idea that you're not allowed to have global development amongst the developing world, and that it all has to be sucked back into the US somehow.
You're right. Because the
so then how can you be on the same side as these people?
Because this is not an ideology that comes from the MAGA base. This is an ideology that comes from the ruling class, which is why you see this continuum between Trump and Biden, because their wealth and their power derives from keeping the quote-unquote developing countries, right? They call them developing. They never actually develop. They're like perpetually developing, right? And it's because through their financial instruments like the IMF and the World Bank, they're keeping them poor. And this is the ideological line of the ruling class, the Malthusian ideological line.
But when MAGA, I totally hear you on that. But when MAGA voters come out and say they want to bring back the jobs from Vietnam, let's just choose that country as an example. What are they trying to bring back? Like small industries and like, I don't know, snow globe manufacturing and like essentially things that the United States has already sort of advanced beyond in terms of its development. They're almost like spitefully saying, okay, now the rest of the world is not allowed to have things. So if the voters themselves believe that, then how can you stand with them?
I don't think it comes out of spite at all. I think it comes out of people who, in the 50s, in the post-war period, in the 50s and 60s, you could get a job at a factory and you could live the American dream. You could have.
But why was that? That was because
white picket fence.
But that was because the United States had burned down all of the competition, right? Like Japan was a nuclear crater. South Korea was essentially collapsing into a set of wooden houses collapsing onto each other. I mean, years later, the United States would essentially flatten the northern Korean peninsula between themselves and the Russians. They would flatten the entire place.
Trump was the first president to ever meet with North Korean leadership. So
sure, but I'm just pointing out to you that the reason why the Americans remember so fondly the 1950s and the 1960s, a time of no competition, is not because there was like some special moment in which America was like out competing everyone else. It's that everyone else wasn't allowed to be in the game because they were dead.
No, but it's not ideological like this. It's material. What people in the 50s and 60s weren't thinking like, oh, I'm so happy that Korea's getting bombed so I can have my house. They were just happy they had their houses. This is what they want. People want this sort of economic base, this sort of the American dream that you can start a family, have a house, have a stable life, based on a traditional working class job. That's what went away. That's what the contradiction is that brought Trump into power. And I mean, you keep talking about war and you're talking about the Korean War, but like I said, MAGA is the anti-war contingent right now. Who is it who's standing up in Congress against the escalation against Russia in Ukraine? It's Marjorie Taylor Greene. It's Thomas Massey. It's Rand Paul. It is zero Democrats.
On that one,
not even AOC.
Maybe I'm going to be pilloried a little bit for this one. Maybe I'll be pilloried a little bit for this one. People disagree with me on this, but I mean, and call me cynical if you like, but I just find it interesting that they come out to stand up against this particular war, the one where they don't control it anyway. Right? Like, if the United States decided tomorrow morning, or if there was a fight in Congress and they decided that they were going to not give the sort of the long-range weapons that Ukraine wants to Ukraine, Ukraine's not going to surrender tomorrow afternoon or something. Like, Ukraine and Russia would be having that fight regardless of whether the United States was present in the situation or not.
If the United States wanted Ukraine to surrender, they would surrender tomorrow.
I don't believe that could happen
because they are backed by NATO. It was the United
I mean,
States.
Ukraine is
who provided the
defending its
intelligence to destroy
Ukraine
the
is
Crimean
defending its
Bridge.
homeland, though, is it
It
not?
was the United States who destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline recently. It is, which by the way was technically an attack on a NATO country, which should have
I
triggered
suppose.
Article
But I
5.
mean, think about it this way: there's only a hypothesis that the United States may have destroyed that pipeline. But let's say that
Oh,
they did.
come on!
Even
Yeah,
if they
that is a come
I'm
on
not,
moment, Ray.
asserting. No, I'm not asserting that Russia did it.
Who
By
do
the
you
way,
think destroyed
I'm
the
saying
pipeline?
I think that Ukraine did it.
You think
No,
Ukraine did
we
it?
They don't have the ability. No.
totally
No,
destroyed the pipeline.
Ukraine is a puppet of NATO at this point. Zelensky is
I mean,
literally an
how
actor.
can you conclude that they're a
Zelensky
puppet at this point?
graduated from playing the president on TV to playing the president in real life.
You know what's funny? Actually, a lot
Yes,
of
but I
people
mean,
don't
Donald
realize
Trump
how
also did that.
how far
No,
right
but Donald Trump
actually
was a reality TV star. This is the difference.
So I mean, what's the I mean, what is the actual material difference here? Like, how is Trump more legitimate than Zelensky then?
How is Trump more legitimate than Zelensky?
Yeah, 'cause I mean, Zelensky is like a comedian or something like this, or some kind of TV host type person who kind of transitioned into this kind of presidential thing because everyone else ended up being knocked out in their electoral process because it's a very weird electoral process they have. And then he had to assume responsibility.
Because first of all, because there was a coup in Ukraine in 2014,
Mhm.
which there was the leaked phone call between Victoria Nuland and Jeffrey Piot, where they were handpicking the new leader of Ukraine. So yes, that was, people talk about, oh, we got to protect Ukrainian sovereignty. Ukrainian sovereignty went out the window in 2014.
But didn't the person they chose end up not being the one that was actually
No, he was the one.
actually remained?
No, it was him. It was
Didn't they choose what's his name? The guy
Yatsenyuk.
whose name was the guy who was associated with the chocolate factory or something was the one they wanted. I've forgotten his name now. Begins with P. Something.
It was Yatsenyuk. They said Yats is the guy. They were talking about Yatsenyuk. He didn't last.
No, but I mean after they abandoned him, there was a person who came afterwards who was a guy who used to run a chocolate factory. And then they settled on that person. We're like, okay, we should have that person in charge. And then he was suddenly gone as well.
Zelensky, because Zelensky goes out there. He's a handsome guy. He's charismatic. He does his fucking Batman voice.
I don't remember it that way from here. I remember people actually were laughing at that because I was saying you can't allow a comedian to be the president of the country. And then the Ukrainians actually came out and voted for him, which essentially took everyone as a blindside. So then they had to cultivate a relationship
ran
with
on an anti-war platform as well,
Yes,
which many Ukrainians wanted out of the war.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it was a very confused situation. So I wouldn't call Zelensky a puppet of NATO or something like this because he was essentially a very confusing individual at the time that he appeared because he wasn't actually part of the plan.
Oh, do you think Obama was a puppet of these same people? Because he also ran on an anti-war hope and change platform, and then when he got in, he raised it from 3 wars to 7. He escalated in Syria. He killed Gaddafi. And he was able to do these things that even George W. couldn't.
I mean, the reason that Obama was able to do what he did was because Obama was actually part of the institutions and had advanced through the system to the point that he had reached the Senate as a politician, whereas Zelensky appeared from essentially nowhere, having been a TV host person. So I'm not sure they're comparable, especially since in one instance, Zelensky rose to power when the war happened in his homeland.
Obama was just as much of an actor as Zelensky. I think since Reagan, all of our politicians have been actors. And the reason Trump is different is because he's a reality TV actor. So instead of West Wing politics, we have reality TV presidency. And reality TV is this. I mean, there's an element of reality to it, right?
I mean, I do think that you're underestimating the way that Eastern Europeans fight, however, because
I'm sorry, that is not a bad analysis, actually.
What you're saying here is equivalent to, like, if you were to say, like, in the 1990s, for example, that Serbia would not be engaging in its war with the ethnic groups within its own territory of former Yugoslavia, essentially, what used to be its territory, if it were not for, like, firm Russian backing or something like this. Except Russia didn't physically enter the location at any point in time. So even if Russia had not actually assisted Milosevic, I can be pretty sure he would have still done what he did regardless. And so I'm just applying the same logic to Ukraine. They would have done what they were going to do.
Sorry to cut you off. Zizzy in Chicago has something to say.
Okay.
Yeah. Why does this matter to matter communism?
Yeah. Well, let's get
Who
back
cares
on
about
topic.
Yeah,
Ukraine?
good point. Good point.
Why does Ukraine matter? They've sent $80 billion over there. And people in Mississippi don't have drinking water. That's why it matters. This
Like,
is
Yeah,
even
I would agree
Swiss
with
don't have
that.
fucking drinking water, dude. They haven't had it for 40 damn years.
No, I think it makes a good point though.
Okay. Yeah, no, this is like the bipartisan agenda of our politicians is Ukraine right now. Yeah, it does matter. It absolutely matters. And when someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to get up there and say, we're sending this money to Ukraine and we don't have baby formula,
Where
I'm a
does she think the money
communist.
should go instead?
Where do I think the money should go
No,
instead of
not
Ukraine?
you, because I know where you would put it. You would obviously send it to the baby formula or to other social programs which are needed right now, right? I'm just saying,
I
that,
would,
do you
I
think
would
that
build
Marjorie Taylor
I would
Greene
build
would
the
send
world
it?
land bridge. I would build
Huh?
the world land bridge connecting the Bering Strait, connecting Alaska to Russia. That's what I would do with the money.
So this is actually, I was going to bring this up because I've heard that point. So I'm not incredibly familiar with Gadsden communism / MAGA communism, whatever. But that is a talking point I have heard for like the 2 weeks that I've been following you guys. Why the land bridge, and why I understand the Russian aspect, because Russia I don't think is as much an enemy to the West as the media is hyping it up to be. But why? But what about China? What about China? And I know you want to kind of make us more like China from an industrial perspective and from an economic perspective,
Damn
but I
straight.
don't think they have our best interest in mind. Why a land bridge with China?
And also, Hungry Country
ahead.
Ball says in the chat, I'll just add to that as well. He points out that in Alaska there isn't actually a highway that connects to the location. So like, how would you? Well, then again, Alaska doesn't actually physically connect to the United States either. It's like it's effectively next to Canada, so you'd have to build through Canada as well.
Yes, we'll be annexing Canada. Canada.
I mean, they're asking what
I can vote for
purpose would
that.
what purpose would this land bridge serve? Why would it not just be a bridge to nowhere, quite literally?
What
Because you'll
purpose
end up
would
in
this land bridge
Kamchatka,
serve?
right?
Trade
With who?
between us and Russia and China.
Okay,
So wait,
here's the
you're for
issue.
free trade.
Wait,
You're for free trade.
No, but
then?
isn't
Okay,
Aiden
wait,
against free trade with
guys,
China?
guys, let's go one at a time.
for
Okay,
crying out
Zizian,
loud.
Aiden, Ray.
Okay.
So here's the problem with the land bridge to Russia. No one lives in Kamchatka because there's volcanoes everywhere. Why the fuck would you build there?
Fair point.
Yeah. That was
It's
going to be my
about
question.
getting goods between. It's not about people living there. It's about a trade route, a new Silk Road.
So
Yeah,
are
which
you
would
saying
then
that
be
land bridge
drowning in
before-
lava every 2 years.
Hungry Country
Well,
Ball
I think
brings
these
up
are
a good
problems
point.
that can be solved. I don't think these are. I don't think these are problems that are unsolvable.
Yeah, Hungry
Well,
Country Ball
Hungry
points out it's
Country
just
Ball
cheaper to
brings up
use
a good
ships.
point about ships being cheaper. With the land bridge, do you think it would be positive from a symbolic aspect? Is that maybe one of the reasons you would be?
It
in
is
support of
symbolic. What I really mean by the World Land Bridge is that we need. It's not just the World Land Bridge. We need to reindustrialize this country. I mean, China can build infrastructure in a way that we can't. They're building high-speed rail, and we can't do. I live in the Northeast. I live on the Acela line, which is from DC to Boston, and they've got Amtrak has a monopoly over it. It's like $100 to get from New York to DC. It takes forever. It's ridiculous. I mean, it's
$200
embarrassing.
to get my
I mean,
to
this
get to my
idea,
best
though-
friend's funeral. It was ridiculous.
There we
I just
go.
want to interject here, though. This idea, though, of trying to build a connectivity between North America and the tip of East Asia would seem to then militate against the things that were said earlier, and of course, which have been said since 2016 by the very same MAGA people in the first place, which is that they don't want to have these trade deals. So you're building an infrastructure so that, and let's be real, it's not going to be Russia sending most of the goods across there because they create nothing they own. It's going to be China that's going to be sending most of the goods. So you're going to be getting Korean goods coming across there, and so on and so forth. And then MAGA people are going to be like, oh my goodness, we don't want these. Isn't it? Because you're against the same trade deals that you're facilitating by the
I don't think
construction
so.
of such a
I don't
bridge.
think so because look.
So, I mean, would you join RCEP or the Trans-Pacific Partnership or something like this and have
We would
lowered
join the Belt
tariffs
and
into
Road.
the floor?
Join the Belt and Road. Join the Belt and Road Initiative.
You know.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
well, I mean,
like
if you
having
join
things
the
that
Belt and
don't.
I mean, if
fall
you
to
join the
dust.
Belt and Road Initiative, that means you're joining RCEP then, which is essentially just TPP plus China, right? At which
Well, the
point
Belt
then...
and Road is not the same as the TPP.
No, I'm not saying it's the same. I'm saying it functionally
Trying
it is
to be.
like having a TPP but with China in it, right? So if you join the Belt and Road
No,
Initiative,
no,
how would you then
no.
sell that to your MAGA base?
How do I sell? I sell it as industrialization. I sell it as jobs. We're bringing back. You'll get a job just like under FDR during the New Deal. You'll get a job industrializing this country,
How will you?
And this is not like a
Why would you
Chinese
flow the-
foreign. This is not a foreign Chinese idea. This is an American idea. We
No,
used
but why
to
wouldn't
do
you
this
just flow
stuff
the
with,
other
like, the Erie
direction?
Canal, the
Why don't you end up with
Tennessee
jobs in
Valley
China
Authority.
instead?
What was that?
Why wouldn't you just end up with jobs in China instead? Which I have a problem with, obviously, but I'm just saying that I'm sure
Why wouldn't we
America
end
makes
up?
a
We're
problem with
building it
that.
because we're building infrastructure here. That doesn't make sense.
No, because I mean, once the infrastructure has been completed, then you've essentially just done the thing which is opposite to what MAGA was trying to apparently achieve, which is to prevent the flow of jobs from the imperial core into the periphery. You're going to end up with all of the jobs migrating their way to China, Malaysia, and Indonesia or something, and then your MAGA base is going to start accusing you of having facilitated this.
Now,
I-
what
Okay,
I would
go,
like to
Cheryl.
know is why do we need to go and have a trade deal with China when you can just shift around tax dollars and do the same thing? Who cares about China? We don't need them.
I don't know,
already
man.
know how
Look
to
around
build
you. Pick up some
infrastructure.
shit in your house. Pick up some of your clothes and see how much of it was made in China.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, all of the appliances are presently used have probably at least got some capacitors in them from China or FETs
Yeah, I
that
know.
were made in
China-
China.
I'm not saying China are like
Then
China.
terrible.
The CCP, they are patriots for China. They are about win-win cooperation. They aren't going to go be like altruists and help people out with nothing in return. They are businessmen. They are about
Okay.
their interests.
So
And
what you're
that's
advocating for fundamentally is not necessarily to align ourselves with China, but more so to emulate them, I guess, in terms of how we treat our country.
Yeah,
Which is
absolutely.
basically tariff
I'm not,
everyone.
I'm not like saying I'm an American. Okay, I want America to be great again. I mean, simple as. And in China, it's pretty simple. China is better at capitalism than the so-called capitalists because in China, their billionaires like Jack Ma are lower than the state in terms of power. They don't have a Bill Gates in China buying up all the farmland. Whereas here, our state is completely subservient to our ruling class. That's the difference. That's why China is, you want to call it socialist, communist. I mean, people argue about this, but it's a different system, clearly.
To play devil's advocate here, though, because I know that people within sort of the MAGA grouping and within the Republican Party in general that you may end up speaking to, and perhaps even Missezi in Chicago is about to say this, so tell me if you were already thinking this when I said it. When you said that China doesn't have a Bill Gates because there's no one that can be above the state and have so much power as to be in control and have kind of like a monopoly on an operating system, well, the retort from the American patriots in this scenario is probably going to be something like, well, China also doesn't have Microsoft Corporation, and thus doesn't actually have that lever of control.
Huawei.
Yeah, but Huawei isn't manufacturing the operating system that's used by like 90% of the world's surface, though.
Right. No, you mean have
Huawei's
the IP.
also owned.
You mean have
Huawei's
Yeah, they
also
don't have
owned
that
by
IP.
party members.
Fuck
so.
the IP. Why do I care about the IP? They always complain that China's quote unquote stealing our IP. Fuck. I don't care about these fucking people's ideas that they purport to own. Fuck them. I don't care. What?
So that's what you.
Bill
So you're kind of
Gates
a
wastes
libertarian on
money.
that issue then, because libertarians would agree with the same thing on IP.
Yes, we are allies of libertarians. Absolutely, we want the same things as them. My disagreement with libertarians is I think you need a strong state to rein in these monopolies, which are crushing free markets. China has more free markets than we do. We don't have any free markets in this country. Our markets are completely controlled. Look at what happened with GameStop. Look at the Reddit GameStop fiasco. As soon as the retail investor started pushing back against these big hedge funds, what did they do? They shut down Robinhood. They wouldn't let you buy the stock. You know, we've got ruthless capitalism when these people are winning, but as soon as we start pushing back against them, suddenly it's a TARP, it's a big bailout. We can't let the airlines fail because of COVID. It's a facade. The whole idea that we live in a capitalist country is a complete fraud.
I agree with it. Me and Mizizi in Chicago would 100% agree.
As Martin Luther King said,
I also do agree on top of that.
We have rugged individualism for the poor and socialism for the rich.
Yep,
he was right
absolutely,
then, and it's only gotten more true.
Here is something where we absolutely agree.
Absolutely.
No, I'm actually kind of surprised how much we agree on some of this stuff.
Yes, I would also agree, but not from a Marxist perspective, but from because I'm a monarchist, I would have it under I would have the crown break up these massive corporations and stuff, and not allow the essentially not allow the merchant caste to overtake
Which
the
crown? What
rightful
crown? What
ruling
crown?
caste of the warrior
You're talking about the
caste.
British crown?
I
No,
think
I'm talking about like in an idealistic, like, in the feudal times, because I'm a feudalist.
Based.
I mean,
Well,
I would
look-
disagree with Aidan on what he said there, because I think that usually, and people can correct me if they think I'm wrong on this, but usually the understanding that socialists bring to this situation is that it is inevitable that if you were to have free market capitalist development, like for example in the United States starting from the late 1800s and going forward, eventually it inevitably results in the rise of monopoly capital, because of course they're free to do whatever they want, which is to of course protect themselves and buy themselves people in Congress and so on and so forth. And so I don't think it magically becomes socialist if capitalists decide they're going to get together in a band and protect their mutual shared interests. That's just what capitalism
That's a
does.
socialist analysis, though. About, I mean, this is where, isn't that what socialists say? Essentially, fascism was created by. Like, I disagree with this theory of
I mean,
fascism.
I'm
but
not. Yeah, I don't
the
agree with
theories
that.
of fascism was, it was a reaction by the
Yeah,
bourgeois.
I don't agree with that.
sector.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. That analysis of how fascism was created. I would not say that it is fascism. What I'm saying is that the thing that Aidan just called socialism in the United States, to me, that's just capitalism at its logical endpoint.
Yes, I would
the
also agree
logical
with
endpoint of
that.
Inevitably, like
capitalism-
liberal
the
capitalism
logical
will
endpoint of
inevitably
capitalism
produce
is
these guys.
socialism. Yes,
Like,
the
I mean,
logical
even with
endpoint of capitalism is socialism. It's not. This is something that's very misunderstood by the American communists. They think we have a revolution and we're going to implement socialism, but this is not Marx's view. Marx's view was that socialism was inevitable. It was inevitably going to grow from the contradictions of capitalism, regardless of what anyone's ideology was.
Yeah,
And
but I mean,
that is precisely what we've seen.
This
if
is
you
kind
look
of
at
where I feel like a
if
lot
you-
of people misunderstand.
if you look at what Marx
Hold
wrote
on,
in the
Ray.
Grundrisse, though.
Hold on, Ray. Let me just say this real quick.
Okay.
But a lot of people kind of misunderstand that Marx wasn't even necessarily as much of an ideologue as someone like Engels. He was making a historical analysis. His theory was fundamentally that socialism would overtake capitalism and there would be a revolution. He wasn't coming out and like saying, let's have a revolution. It was a historical analysis, dialectical
Right, yeah.
materialism. That's what it fundamentally was. It was not initially an ideological movement until Engels essentially weaponized it. And I don't see that in a good or a bad way, but
I wouldn't draw this distinction between the two of them, but I agree with your analysis. Yes.
I mean, I would say that if you look at what Marx wrote in the Grundrisse, right, even if we take him as having, say, an alternative path in which there is not a revolution, right? Let's say it evolves naturally in this direction, and eventually capitalism is superseded by socialism, as is quote unquote inevitable. I mean, Marx did actually describe what that process is supposed to look like, which is supposed to be a reduction of labor hours is supposed to be key to that process, and there's a bunch of other things that were also attached to it, which shows that an agenda of the working class is what's in charge, as opposed to the agenda of the bourgeoisie being in charge. You can't look at the United States right now and say that there's a workers' party that is in charge of shaping things in a particular way that caters toward workers. So the socialism that we're talking about there, I don't think that if you were to look at it, I don't think that Marx would recognize that. He would say that what is going on there. I mean, hold on, let me pull the quote. Marx doing
I know what you're talking
accelerationism.
about. Here's what I would say. What you are conflating the political reality to the economic reality. Politically, we are not socialists. Politically, you've got Donald Trump says we will never be a socialist country. Nancy Pelosi says, I'm sorry, we're capitalists. This is because the economic base has outstripped this capitalist political system. And this is why our political system is so impotent and decrepit, because it's not actually kept up with the economic base, which is socialist. Yes, we still have the people in power, even the billionaires and the people who are actually in power, who will call themselves capitalists. But this is just ideological. This is just what Marx would call the superstructure. The superstructure is still capitalist, but it has been outstripped by the economic base. Which I mean,
sure, but then since they
refuse
refuse to make the changes in order to actualize it, then it means you're not actually in socialism. You're in something called the crisis of capitalism. These are these are two very different things. I mean, to quote again Marx directly now, I've actually got it in front of me. So it's Grundrisse 14.2 because the whole thing is in fragments. It's just one statement. And he actually quotes from the Source and Remedy 1821 here, where he says, forces of production and social relations, the two different sides of the development of the social individual, appear to capital as mere means and are merely the means for it to produce on its limited foundation. But in fact, however, they're the material conditions to blow this foundation sky high. Quote, and this is where the big quote comes in, truly wealthy a nation when the working day is 6 rather than 12 hours, wealth is not command over surplus labor time, but rather disposable time outside that needed in direct production for every individual and the whole society. That's when you know you're in socialism. So I don't think anyone can take a look at, for example, Amazon's warehouses, where there is so little free time that people are being forced to like pee in bottles or something, and be like, yeah, this looks like we're entering socialism here. It's literally not that. I'm sure that everyone in this group should be able to agree that if socialism is defined as a thing I just read to you that Marx said would happen naturally, bear in mind this is a non-revolutionary thing that he's describing there. He's describing a scenario in which capitalism is subverted and just becomes socialism, what it would look like. The thing that America has is definitely not that.
Okay.
Can
I respond to that?
I agree that some of it is, to an extent, that has been what America has become, but not to the full extent of what Marx discusses.
Let me respond. First of all, this doesn't just come from Marx. Even bourgeois economists like John Maynard Keynes have said the same thing. He predicted that we would have, I think, like a 4-hour work week by now. And obviously he was wrong, but the question isn't do we have these things? The question is, do we have the economic base which could provide these things? And the answer is absolutely yes. The reason we have such long hours is because we have all these bullshit jobs where people are just sending emails for a living, where people are, I mean, you could read David Graeber's book about this, which is appropriately titled Bullshit Jobs, that people are, what work is today is secondary. It is about, the Marxist sense, reproducing surplus value. But first of all, it is a means of control. You go to work. I mean, this was made pretty evident during COVID because they're saying, oh, we got to get everybody back to the office. But like, why? Like, I'm sorry, if you can work from home, you have a bullshit job.
That was also the managerial revolution, where the managers, these people that have no skills but occupy all these endless positions, like, manager of like HR department and like the assistant manager and like all these bullshit positions that are just made up for people to occupy.
Absolutely.
I mean, it could even be looked at the other way around. The capitalist property developers wanted to back at work so they could collect rent.
Let me finish. We call them the PMC, the professional managerial class, which is a term that was coined by Barbara Ehrenreich, and she was describing the Soviet Union. She was describing the bureaucrats and economic planners in the Soviet Union. This is what she called the PMC. We have the same thing in America today, because like the Soviet Union, we are socialist. We have economic planners. I mean, the people who work at BlackRock, they may not work for the state, but they are economic planners at BlackRock and Vanguard. That's what they're doing. They are PMC. Their job is to plan the economy, and they absolutely have an agenda. I mean, you can see it. Like, okay, when I go to Chipotle, and they don't have plastic straws. They have paper straws. Now, why is that? Because if we were just in capitalism, obviously plastic straws are better, right? They should be buying the superior commodity, but they're not. They're buying the paper straws. They're buying an inferior commodity, and they're giving their capital to, I mean, maybe it's the same company, but let's imagine they're giving capital to the paper straw company instead of the plastic straw company. Why is that? Well, it's because of the green agenda. It's not about the profit motive. It's about a social end, which is the green agenda. And the same thing you see happening with quote unquote wokeism, right? Leftists like to cope about this and say, oh, they're co-opting it because it's so popular. But that's not the case. It originates
bourgeois ideology, wokeism, fundamentally.
It absolutely
yes.
Is.
I live in Northern Virginia, and I see this all the time. Like,
I mean, Occam's razor. I mean, I want to invoke some Occam's razor on this because this seems like a very complicated explanation when there's a far simpler one that's like right in front of us. The thing with the paper straws, for example, I mean, paper companies like to make money. someone's decided that's a good investment. Therefore, you end up with paper straws.
Why?
Then
Why
the
is that a good
other
investment?
thing
They're
I'll
worse
point out
than
is on the
plastic straws. Why is that a good investment?
the second one I'll put out is on the thing where they rushed everyone back into work even though COVID hadn't actually been defeated. And so this is a really interesting one because of the fact that you can easily contrast it against China's zero COVID policy, in which a party of the working class is actually in charge doing socialism, and suddenly, oh, you're actually still in the lockdown because they care about your public health. Whereas in the United States, they were like, yeah, property developers, and this is the United Kingdom had this issue as well, property developers for commercial properties, they want you to continue to go into work so they can collect rent. Therefore, everyone was forced to go back to work. Occam's razor. It means the capitalist class
I
is
don't
in
know what
charge.
you
They
mean,
want
because
you physically
rent
at
is
work.
in opposition. Rent is in opposition to capital. Rentiers is in opposition to capitalists. This doesn't come from Marx. This comes from Adam Smith, from the classical political economists. You've got
I mean,
the
surely we can
labor,
agree that
the
Adam Smith is
rentier, and the
wrong
capitalist.
about this. No, but I mean, surely we can agree that Adam Smith was wrong and he was being idealistic when he supposed that rentiers were somehow not going to be part of the capitalist system, or they're in some way antagonistic toward the development of
No, I
capitalism.
don't agree. They are absolutely antagonistic to
Hey
capitalism.
guys, I'm gonna cut you guys off for a second. Kilhoon and I think Mazizian wanted to say something real quick. I think we should give them a before we get back to the debating. Let's let them weigh in a little.
No, dude, I
Well,
didn't want to say anything.
Oh, okay. It was-
I forgot exactly what I was going to say, but to go on to this renter thing, I actually view rentals and like the idea of it and how they're trying to shove us into all these rental based. Like I honestly consider home ownership too a form of renting because you have to take out a mortgage these days to afford a house. When back in the day, it would take a single income to pay off a house in a couple of years instead of like 40 years today. But it is fundamentally a bourgeois attempt to control the working class, to lock them into all these contracts and deals, and also a use by the elites to control
And
them
also
in
the
congruence
increasing
with the
complexity
bourgeoisie.
of it. The increasing complexity of it and the speculation and all of this stuff that goes along with it, it seems to be like the apex of neoliberal financialization of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't agree that these things can be seen as somehow being oppositional to capitalism. It seems as though this is a thing that happens in capitalism, and that is how everyone ended up being forced. Well, everyone except those who could provide credible reasons as to how they could stay at home and work from home, but everyone else was essentially marched back out into the workplace while the virus was still raging.
Okay, you want to talk about COVID?
This is what I've got to connect this to the point though before you say that. And so this is where I would draw the contrast between China and the United States, in which China is actually governed by a party that claims to be governing in the interests of the working class. It's not perfect, but you can clearly see there's a different class dynamic happening here, and that's what makes the difference between China being a country that is a socialist market economy, and I put quotation marks around that because some people don't like to call it that, but that's what they're calling themselves, versus whatever it is that's happening in the United States, which I would just call neoliberalism, where there are people who have control over large monopolies and they have decided that they're going to rule in favor of the capitalist class at every opportunity, which they have done. And so that's why I disagree with the MAGA communists when they try to claim that, oh, the United States is socialism. I mean, only if we change the definition to make it so that you can somehow have socialism while antagonists against the concept of what socialism is supposed to be, which is government that is by and for working class people. And if you omit that part, then perhaps you can somehow make this argument. But the thing is, I don't know why they would want to do that, because it wouldn't be helpful to them to do that, because surely the key point that people who call themselves communists or socialists in the United States should be making is that the government that you currently have is quote unquote the wrong government and needs to be replaced by a movement led by the working class. Surely that's something that you all should be doing, and not trying to say that Marjorie Taylor Greene can lead you to the promised land.
Marjorie Taylor Greene does represent the working class more than anyone else in Congress. So again,
also explain, because that's an interesting take.
That Marjorie Taylor Greene represents the working class?
Yeah, because I kind of see her as if I were a socialist, I'd just see her as a middle class grifter, more or less.
Well, here's what I'll say. This word middle class, this is a vague word that gets used by the politicians because it doesn't really mean anything. Yeah, she represents, I think, also she was a petite bourgeois herself. She was a small business owner. But here's what something that I think is important that the vast majority of communists in America overlook. is they talk about small business tyrants, and they talk about the petit bourgeois are like class enemies, but it's not true. It's not true, because in what's happening today in America is that the petit bourgeois, or these small business owners, as they get called, are being crushed by the monopolies. I mean, you say we live in capitalism, riddle me this. Why is it during the COVID lockdowns that Walmart and Amazon were allowed to stay open, but the small businesses had to close?
Absolutely. You see, back during this time, I worked. For years, I was a bookseller. I worked for. I'm not going to be any more general. I'm not going to be any more specific than that. That's what I mean. But fortunately, my job wasn't considered. It wasn't considered essential, but it wasn't considered non-essential. It was second tier. My hours got increased during COVID. But I saw a lot of other people. The furniture store across the street of the vendor that for the corporation I worked for, the small mom and pop furniture store went out of business. We had a bar next door that went out of business. The movie theater
I go through.
went out of business.
I go to my hometown, and all these businesses I grew up with are boarded up now because, I mean, it's part of the Great Reset agenda. When they say you'll own nothing and be happy, they're not talking about the working class. The working class already owns nothing. They're talking about the small business owners. The small business owning, these small businesses.
The kulaks.
Mom and pop,
They want to destroy the kulaks, essentially.
Sort of, yeah. These are the people who are going to quote unquote own nothing and be happy, because they're the people who own things right now. And yeah, as they are being proletarianized and their shit is being taken from them, not in a capitalist like, oh, well, you lost in the free market. No, this is state intervention. Walmart can stay open. Your business cannot. Completely arbitrary. I mean, can COVID not spread at Walmart? It doesn't make any sense.
So I'd say it's state intervention, but a very loose state intervention, like a very duplicitous almost. So it's not direct.
Yeah, they don't want us to recognize this. They don't want us to recognize this fact. They use this word neoliberalism to disguise the fact that this is a planned economy. This is a socialist economy, which is being wielded for the benefit of, instead of the workers, as it is in China, as you mentioned. They have a socialist economy which is meant to benefit the workers.
When was neoliberalism ever not planned? Like, I thought that the original definition of it, because I mean, I've seen the definition of it as used in the UK. I've also seen the infamous definition that Mikhail Foucault came out with, for example.
Mikhail Foucault wasn't neoliberal.
I don't care about.
And his definition of what it was he essentially defined it as a planned system in which the power of the state is going to be leveraged for the purpose of reviving liberalism by doing a series of interventions against liberalism's opponents using the state.
And you know what's hilarious?
That sounds right. That sounds correct. Yeah, I would agree with that.
This is very similar to what what's his name? Burnham. What's his name? I don't know why I forget his first name, because I was about to mention him.
James Burnham.
Sorry. Suicide of the West, where he was talking about how going into the 21st century, especially, the liberal class is going to have, and he was a conservative, like sort of classical liberal, but like became conservative, anti-communist, kind of nationalistic. But either way, his whole thing was, we're going to come to a point where the liberal class, which fundamentally claims to believe in democracy, they'll have two choices ahead of them. And this is the inherent contradiction of liberalism. You can either expand democracy to everybody in the state, which means even to people who fundamentally ideologically oppose democracy, who will vote against democratic interests, or you could restrict democracy only to a select few, aka the liberal class, but at the same time that fundamentally betrays the whole tenets of liberal democracy. So
exactly.
That is the contradiction of liberalism, and I think that is one of Burnham's smartest
Marx
points.
also described this in the infamous 13th Brumaire as well, where I think he phrases it poetically as the bourgeoisie will choose to silence themselves in order to preserve their purse. So in other words, they'll give away democracy in order to make sure they can continue to hold onto their money.
And even Oswald Spengler took it even farther, and he outright said democracy, liberal democracy, or just any kind of democracy in the modern world, which can only fundamentally be liberal, viably speaking, democracy itself is just a cover for the rule of money.
Yes, I would agree. I came to that thesis several years ago.
When Darth Colhoun He describes himself as a monarchist, but I have to ask you, you call yourself a monarchist. Are you a British monarchist or are you a North Korean monarchist?
Okay, so I'm intellectually a monarchist in the way that Evola was, where like if I had to say something, I would support the Ghibelline ideal. Like I'm an idealist. I'm not like I'm going to shill for the British monarchy because I don't live in
I
Britain.
like the king. I do like the king.
Well, yes, I do like King Charles, but I'm not going to shill for the British crown.
You know, he's an Evolian too, but nobody knows that. Nobody realizes it.
All right, well, you guys just need to read your Thomas Paine. That's all I can say. Read your Thomas Paine.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I'm not somebody who's going to shill for a specific monarch. I'm in a monarchist in the idealistic sense, in the Christian idealistic sense specifically.
Well, I mean, me too. I call a spade a spade. Stalin, Mao, Kim Jong Il. These people are monarchs, pretty much. But and that's why any sort of they call them strong men. Any sort of leader who can actually challenge this like shadowy oligarchy we have is going to get completely demonized. I mean, Gaddafi. You know, there's tons of examples.
Yeah, I know Gaddafi.
You've heard it here.
Well. Trump is.
You've heard it here first, folks. Politocrat is the Kim family's top guy.
There we go. Yeah, there we go.
Wait, what am I sorry? Can you repeat that?
There we go. Yeah, so the reason Trump gets demonized in the same way these people do is because there's, I mean, I agree with Darth Gilhoon. I think you need a patriarchal sort of quote-unquote strongman to challenge the hegemony of these oligarchic institutions. And the reason they demonize anyone who they call them dictators, even though, you know, UK calls people dictators when they have a fucking king. I mean, it's just like blatantly ideological. It's because they don't want anyone challenging these oligarchic institutions, which, you know, the banks, the NGOs, the think tanks. And
I want to say,
there's never been a revolution that did not have a patriarchal sort of monarchical figure attached to it. It's just, it seems to be some sort of a law of nature that, something about how we are. We don't rally around like democratic.
Every movement needs a Caesar.
I think anarchism is total idealism. Yeah, we rally around individuals, and yeah, I think we need an American Caesar, an American Stalin. Absolutely.
Would you?
Wait, this is the wait.
A question I do have for Aiden,
hold on,
though.
guys, I'm gonna cut you off. This is where I feel like, because monarchy is a very, very specific concept, but not all strongmen are necessarily monarchs. I think what you're thinking of, Aiden, and this isn't me like correcting you or anything, or just trying to like
go ahead.
Like intellectually one-upping, but I think this is like something I think you should look into. I think what you're describing is more akin to what is known as Caesarism, as opposed to monarchism, which is where you have citizen strongmen, populist citizen strongmen who rise up to be sort of it is the fullest extent, it is the fulfillment of democracy, more or less, where instead of being enshrined by like the divine right of kings, their right to rule, they are seen as an extension of the people's will. So think of someone like, again, Julius Caesar. That's where the term comes from. I'd highly recommend, I don't know if you're much of a reader or not, but if you are, I'd highly recommend The Decline of the West by Oswald Spengler. Kind of a conservative.
Is he like a German conservative revolution guy?
Yes, he was.
He identified as a socialist, though, but also as a right-wing conservative. But he doesn't insert a lot of his ideology in his historical writings. But I've always said second greatest historian of the 20th century.
There is this book, though, by Oswald Spengler called The Hour of Decision, where he does actually get into his politics.
That's the one that was banned by Hitler because Spengler was not sufficiently racist enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes.
I'll check it out.
Spengler was essentially a Nazgul that shilled for the monarchy.
Spengler actually, quite literally, most important writer I've ever read in terms of helping me re-examine my view on history. And he's actually what turned me away from materialism. And I just mean that in general. I'm not trying to like convert you away from materialism, of course,
No,
Aiden.
no,
But I just say he's the
I'll
one
read
who
it
made me
again.
re-examine my materialist mindset.
I've taken from, lots of heterodox. I'm a Haasist. Lots of heterodox.
I like that
I'm a
term now.
Haasist, yeah.
I was preparing for the stream by watching what's his channel called, Infrared, earlier. So.
Yeah. That's
Interesting
where my,
direction that
question comes from.
infrared went on, from like a hardcore Marxian traditional leftist perspective to tacitly sympathizing with Trump in the Jimmy Dore sense to full on MAGA communism, and I could like completely respect the on the noseness about like people like Haas. I watched his video about the him talking to the populist Trump supporters at the rally with like David Bowie playing in the background. It's like they agree with this guy. It's like hilarious. This is what I was saying before the stream. The elite are most afraid right-wing cultural values, left-wing economics. That would be almost potentially an unstoppable
Yeah, I
force.
agree. I legitimately believe that Haas has the potential to be the American Lenin.
You mean the American Caesar? I subscribe to the Caesarist theory. So,
are you all trying to support Trump in 2024 then?
Me, no, personally.
No, not you. I mean Aiden.
You mean like vote for him? I don't vote.
Okay. No, I mean try to drive more people toward that outcome. Is that what you're trying to do?
I'm never going to tell anyone to vote. I think it's a waste of time.
Okay.
It depends on what happens in 2024. Right now, there's a lot of pressure on Trump with the Mar-a-Lago raid. He's tied up in these lawsuits. I think what the ruling class is trying to do is to completely domesticate him so they can wheel him back out and be like, oh, it's your guy, it's Trump, and then get him in and he'll do whatever they want. So will that happen? I hope not.
I also view they're trying to prop up DeSantis because he's the safe guy.
I prefer DeSantis.
The DeSantis deception. The DeSantis
this is probably my inner neoliberalism speaking. So.
Yes, that is plutocrat very much. I'll call you out anytime.
They want to pull the Trump people to DeSantis. Absolutely, completely agree.
Yep, because he'll support all the neocon wars.
He's basically a nicer Trump.
Yep.
He's using the cultural issues, which are secondary to the foreign policy issues
and the economic issues,
to get people on board with because that was Trump's real problem. The reason Trump was a problem was because he was doing things like meeting with Kim Jong-un. He was I know he was anti-China rhetorically very much, but he says he has had a good relationship with Xi. He had a good relationship with Putin, and now with Biden in there, these are like, people are not even viewing Russians and Chinese as humans anymore. It's getting ridiculous.
This is the funny thing. So the media painted Trump as like super anti-China when he was like buddies with Xi. Essentially, they got along great.
I don't agree with this. It's very possible for America to say he got along great with someone.
Ray. Let me finish what I was saying, Ray. No, so because he was close with Xi, but he had anti-China rhetoric, whereas Trump had pro-Russia rhetoric, but was the most anti-Russian president since John F. Kennedy.
Well, now we've got Biden.
And Biden.
Biden's
kind of going back to the Obama consensus, but on the surface, doing what Trump did.
We can't prove this in any way, but I think that if Trump had won, things would be going down differently with Ukraine and Russia right now.
So you think? No, exactly. That's what I'm thinking. Russia would have been too scared to invade Ukraine if Trump were still.
No, I don't think it was about fear. I think it was about. Why did they impeach Trump? They impeached Trump. He did lots of things that were impeachable, but what they went after him for was that he threatened to stop sending weapons to the fucking Azov battalion. That was what crossed the line, and he was looking into Joe Biden and his son's dealings in Ukraine.
Okay, I get what you mean. Yeah.
So no, I don't think he's like an ideological anti-imperialist, but in practice, he was. Yeah, he was the most anti-imperialist president since JFK.
I'd say JFK was somewhat imperialist, but like not in the same way that imperialists today are imperialist.
Sure,
I would say JFK was pro-Vietnam.
So was Trump, but JFK was anti-imperialist enough to get killed.
Okay,
true. True. Like LBJ is my least favorite president. So yeah.
I'll put to you 2 Middle East scenarios that Trump was involved in. You tell me what you all think of those then. And so the first one, which I'm sure you all are familiar with, was the whole business of tacitly allowing Iran to join the fight against ISIL, and then having Donald Trump turn around and put an actual drone strike onto Qasem Soleimani as a thank you for all of his help. I mean, that's the first one. So I'll have you guys address both of those, but that and the other one I'm about to talk about. And so then there's the other one, of course, which is the Kurdish people raising up their varying organizations to struggle against ISIL, while Turkey is in the background secretly supplying them the whole time. I mean, I'm sure we actually had a live stream where this was discussed before, so I probably don't have to go over the evidence for that all over again, but documented, like no need to like rehash that. We know that Turkey was actually covertly supporting ISIL in certain regions that they wanted to capture so they could do their ethnic cleansing in that area. And Trump essentially abandoned the Kurdish people to be ethnically cleansed in those locations and gave them no assistance whatsoever. So how do we reconcile, quote, anti-imperialist Trump with the same Donald Trump that also killed Qasem Soleimani and who deliberately tried to sacrifice Kurdish civilians to the Turks?
So here's my response to this, real quick. My quick response. So I don't think Trump is fundamentally not an ideologue, and so I hate the whole like, oh, Trump is basically American Putin. I hate that whole analysis. But the one thing that the people who say that are correct is because Putin is also not an ideologue. Yeah, Putin would deep down prefer communism to what Russia has now, but he needs to play within the rules of Western liberalism in order to keep power. He's a Putinist fundamentally. Trump is very similar. Trump will be whatever he needs in order to be in power. He knew that he could benefit more from the Republican.
Either of these people.
So this is what I'm saying. So Trump will basically so this isn't even this isn't even necessarily a criticism. This is more of an analysis of Trump. Trump will pretty much analyze and listen to whatever the last person told him he should do, because he's a little too trusting, I guess, in terms of like policy, in terms of like how he should implement it. So, and this is my theory, and there's actually things. So, do you know who the last person Trump allegedly talked to on the phone before he called off the invasion of Iran after killing Soleimani like 3 weeks earlier? You know what? Who the last person he talked to on the phone before stepping down was, before like turning it back?
John Bolton.
Tucker Carlson.
Really, I didn't know that.
Okay, interesting.
Next day, he called off. He basically fired. I don't think he fired Bolton then, but Bolton started sidelining Bolton, and I think ultimately, yeah, Trump was hawkish in some areas. But I do think in many ways he did live up to his sort of peace candidate persona in 2015. Not as much as I would have liked.
But wasn't it Eric Trump that actually had come out in the first place on that thing? It was on Breitbart, where Eric Trump was actually in a podcast where they asked him what was the central motivating reason that Donald Trump became awakened and decided he wanted to become president. And I think they asked him this. It must have been like in about, what was it, 3 or 4 weeks before he actually did become president? And I think they asked him that question. And Eric Trump actually responded and said that it was something like, Trump has always been a great friend of people in the United States who are sympathetic to the plight that Israel faces, and so on and so forth. And that he had been in conversations with the Saudis and so on, the so-called peaceful president, as you
Trump
call
was
it.
very confusing when it came to Israel.
And so he came to hold on. And then he came to the conclusion. He came to the conclusion that the sole reason that he should do everything in order to make himself become president was because he wanted to struggle against Iran. That was what Eric Trump said that Trump's motivation was 4 weeks before he got elected.
Here's what I'll say. In my what MAGA communism is about is it's about materialism. We're bringing it back to reality. So yeah, in my head, I have this anti-imperialist American Caesar who's going to do all the things I want to do. I'm kind of surprised you didn't bring up Israel, actually, because but yeah, the Soleimani's murder, I completely condemn. But in reality, I don't have this imaginary anti-imperialist Caesar. I have Trump, and I can support this guy in my head as much as I want. What's this going to do? In reality, I'm with Trump because, look, yeah, he did bad. I mean, I don't think the executive. I think what the JFK assassination proved is that the executive is not the highest power in the land. I mean, he was like trying to pull troops out of Syria, and his generals were lying to him. and just like playing a little cup and ball game and moving them around and telling them that they had been moved out. But he, compared to Biden, absolutely he was more anti-imperialist. I mean, like I said, I don't think this Ukraine, Russia stuff would be going down. I don't think the Taiwan, China stuff would have been going down. I mean, he met with Kim Jong-un, the first American president to do something like that.
One of my biggest praises
The Afghanistan pullout was really orchestrated by Trump negotiating with the Taliban, even though Biden got credit for it. And now that Biden's back in, and these ghouls like fucking Victoria Nuland and Anthony Blinken, it's just full steam ahead. It's I mean, just look at the rhetoric. Just look at the rhetoric that people are saying right now about Russia and about China, and also about Iran. I mean, you've got this color protest popping off there right now. It wasn't like this when Trump was president. We weren't banning Russians from like Wimbledon or whatever, and like the Russian cats, like all this insane shit. It's like freedom cabbage all over again. This wasn't happening when Trump was president. So
I mean, to be fair to the Iranian civilians in this particular scenario, I mean, I don't think that any American politician would have been able to have control over what the besieged did and how the Iranian people responded to that. Because I mean, they killed people in the street. Everyone saw it happening, and of course, as you know, in Central Asia. I mean, I consider Iran part of Central Asia. Maybe they'll disagree with me, but in Central Asia, there's this whole thing about
civilizationally, it's Islam, but
geographically,
Central Asia.
But like there's this deep-seated thing that you can't have security forces literally shooting people's children in the street and not expect to be met with an uprising swiftly and sharply afterwards. I mean, plus on top of that, it was all recorded on camera. The girl was like wearing the hijab or whatever it was, and the besieged were like, "Oh, you're not wearing it quite as correctly as we might like you to." And then they ended up actually killing this girl, and then more people started to die, and then protests came out and they started attacking the protesters as well. So at that point, I don't even think you would need to have like some shadowy person from the Central Intelligence Agency rubbing their hands somewhere in the middle of this or anything. No, I mean, that's an entirely autonomous protest that can happen all by itself and doesn't need any input from the West for it to have occurred.
Okay, well,
in my view at least.
I think you're Charlie Brown trying to kick the football. I've seen this song and dance too many times before. I remember when Gaddafi's troops were getting Viagra to go mass rape. I remember when
well, I mean, the
Iraqis were throwing babies out of incubators.
No, I mean, the Gaddafi one was obvious. No, I mean, the Gaddafi thing was obviously ridiculous and fake because of the fact that they were orchestrating that in real time and you could see it happening.
The Russians are doing the same thing. They're giving people believed it enough that they recycled the same fucking black atrocity propaganda smear against the Russians, and they said, "Oh, the Russians are giving Viagra to their troops to rape Ukrainians," which is just an insane thing to say. The only way you could believe that is if you literally think Russians are barbarians. It doesn't even
I haven't seen any proof of them doing that particular thing, but I mean, I don't even know why that one was brought out, because the things that have been proven that Russia's military is doing are actually, like, if it can even be believed, even worse somehow than the things that have been unconfirmed. Like, have you seen the one with the bucket of golden teeth, for example, and stuff like this?
No,
these things look.
That just sounds like World War II propaganda.
It sounds like Iraqi WMDs. That's what it sounds like.
This is one of those things that, like, many people in the circles that I frequent also found ironic as well, which is that, I know it's a frequent refrain that's been going on around here, and it's obviously not coming from outside, but it's rather just people autonomously observing these things, I think, which is that it seems rather ironic.
Nobody is autonomously observing.
I'm just saying it seems
Everyone
rather
has
ironic.
An agenda. Nobody's living above society with no care about earthly delights, just objectively reporting on this.
I'm just saying it seems rather ironic to me that all of the things that Russia have spent since 1945 pontificating about and petty moralizing about, turns out that these guys, when they're placed under a mild amount of pressure in a guerrilla war, will do all of the exact same things that they have said that National Socialist Germany did, that they said the Empire of Japan did, that they said that Italy did, and so on and so forth. It's almost like suddenly, in an actual war, when Russians have to be observed by cameras, they do the same thing.
Aren't you a Maoist third worldist? Where is this coming from?
An observation of reality. Like, why would I not criticize? Why would I not criticize Russia here on this, given that Russia is literally acting as an imperialist power, much like they have done previously when they were the Russian Empire, and now they expect us to trust them because once upon a time they used to be the Soviet Union. Well, I mean, once upon a time was a very long time ago. Why are we supposed to like cut Putin slack on things that he's doing on camera? You see what I mean?
I haven't consumed the same atrocity propaganda, so I'm not sure what you're talking about. But this comparison between Nazi Germany and Putin, I think, is just ridiculous. I mean, what do you think the U.S. would do? What would the U.S. do if China was inviting Mexico, if they did a coup in Mexico, invited Mexico into a hostile military alliance, and we're saying, promoting all this propaganda in Mexico, like we're going to kill Americans, we hate Americans, and then saying we're going to put nuclear weapons in Mexico? How do you think America would respond?
America would respond exactly as Russia had responded, and then they would have to be condemned for it.
No, we would not respond like Russia responded at all. We wouldn't have let it gone on that long, even slightly. I mean, whatever the equivalent of Maidan was in Mexico, we would have been in there probably beforehand. I mean, we wouldn't let that shit even slightly happen. And I don't even need to hypothesize, because we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, which I can point to. Well, I mean, we were ready to start nuclear war over what pretty much the same thing that Russia was.
Well, I mean, Vladimir Putin has had one nuclear threat per week so far, in which he's
been threatening. To be fair, he has been threatening using tactical nukes.
Yeah, so it's not like he hasn't done that either. Which also I think we should all consider to be a monstrous thing, considering that it's only been used once, and we've seen what the effect of it being used once is.
Not Kevin Castley. Kevin Castley loves nukes, right, guys?
Yeah, but I mean, we had that argument against him before.
PFP guy.
What? No, do you know Kevin Castley, Aiden?
That guy's a fucking psycho. Yeah.
Dude, he's been on my streams before. He's an acquaintance of mine. We get along, but this guy, he's fucking insane, dude. I love Kevin. He's so crazy.
Yeah. Here's my take on Kevin. He's a furry and therefore wrong.
Based.
Yes.
I would debate Kevin any day.
I can host. I've been needing to host debates.
If we were to reopen these camps, I think Kevin Cassie would probably be the first ones in there. Yeah.
Oh my god.
The world.
Oh boy, can't wait to go to German building the world language again.
I'm sorry, you guys were all talking at once. I didn't quite make that out.
Yeah, no dead air, guys.
I was just memeing. What did you say, Politicrat?
No, I was memeing too. I said, guys, make sure not to have dead air.
Oh.
It was after like a 5-second pause, moment of silence.
We should ground it back into how we got down this path in the first place, though. It was only because I was trying to say that the comparison between what happened with in Libya with Gaddafi, and I should put on the record, by the way, that I was actually opposed to the entire action in Libya before it even happened, was ostracized for it. So it's one of those things where this is not me doing backseat driving on the Libya thing. I knew that was garbage from the time it actually started. What I'm saying is that the stuff we see happening. I'm saying the things we're seeing happening in Iran now are not the same thing as that. Because it is not like some weird Islamic fundamentalist force that's kind of rising up with weird backing coming from.
Don't you think it's very convenient timing that this shit is popping off right after Iran said they are going to join the SCO?
Well, I mean, let me put it this way: if it was a plot, and this is again, people can call me cynical on this one, but if it were a plot, it would not be like random girls jumping up and down in the street or something, because they have no institutional power and it's extremely unlikely they'd be able to win. What it would be, if it was a plot, it would have been some other Islamist group aligned with some different type of Shia understanding that has some adjacent connection to armed forces or military, so that you'd be able to have a more easy transition. That's what someone who'd be doing a plan would be doing if they were trying to do some kind of dirty tricks.
Why?
They would not choose college students in a university.
College students are yeah, they would. College students are.
I mean, they didn't do it with the Gaddafi thing, though, did they? With the Gaddafi thing, they chose the students.
Well, it's not what you're. I mean, you're trying to apply a blanket, like this is what a color revolution is. I'll tell you what my blanket. This is what a color revolution is. If the Western media is reporting on it, it's a color revolution. Simple as.
Well, it's not just going to be everything. I mean, they've been on. They will. All, if whenever some upheaval happens somewhere, they're going to swoop in and be like, "Here we are on camera right now."
Are we using Spenglerian terms? The colored revolution?
No. Color
because that's literally that's literally the thesis of the hour of decision.
A Western-backed regime change operation disguised as like the Arab Spring, like springtime for the people. Yeah, when the Western media talks about it like that, it's in their interest. Were they reporting on the riots in Colombia before COVID or in Chile?
Nope, not at all.
No, they were reporting on what about or like the truckers in Canada? They have to report on that because it's in Canada. But how do they report on it? Was that a springtime for the people? No, they called them fascists. They called them white nationalists. They sent fucking agent provocateurs out there to wave a Nazi
Most of them were like,
and
I'm sorry, most of them were like gruff.
I mean, they did actually
populists who just wanted money, who just
they
wanted
did actually report on Chile though, didn't they?
Vaguely, sort of, in the U.S.
Not like Iran, not like that what fucking woman who's going on a CNN saying that they need to impose more sanctions on Iran.
Sure,
Who,
but that was because
Department.
I mean, well, that was because in the Chile scenario, they had an interesting needle they had to thread there, which is on the one hand, they kind of didn't like the person who was incoming because obviously that person was orientated toward the left, but they also didn't exactly dislike the person who was outgoing either. Yeah, I can't remember their names at this point. But I mean, they were kind of stuck on that one. Whereas with the Iran thing, they already don't like Iran's government. So of course they're going to say, "Oh, people who are rebelling right now, they must be nice," right? So they would say that, but that doesn't mean they're in control of it. It just means that they already have a pre-prepared narrative, which may accidentally be correct.
You mentioned Occam's razor earlier. I think we can use Occam's razor in this scenario, in that when there's this springtime for the people, which is in the interests of the West, which is being promoted by Western media, and they've got their like a literal State Department asset going on CNN to say, "Oh, the people of Iran want more sanctions." Is this right after Iran joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization? Is this a coincidental uprising that happened right when it was convenient for the West, or is this a color revolution?
I mean, you'd have to argue that Iranian Iranian police forces decided they were going to just randomly go on a murder spree for a brief moment there against young people, and that somehow the West manipulated them into doing that. I mean, to me, it looked like an own goal.
Are you talking about Iran or Tiananmen?
Iran, where they scored that. Where they scored that goal on themselves.
Look, I don't know specifically what you're talking about, because, like I said, I'm not watching the TikTok videos and the live streams.
I mean, this really wasn't a TikTok thing, right? I mean, the parents of the child who was killed.
People still post pictures of soldiers and pretend they were protesters from Tiananmen and say it was this Tiananmen massacre and this brutal crackdown. And look,
I'm not sure these two things are comparable. I mean, that was 1994, and people were unsure as to what cameras were pointing in which direction.
Business of Iranians. It's not my business. Okay, if Iran wants to have a revolution, that's the business of the Iranians. But that's not really what's going on right now, is it? This woman's going on CNN.
I mean, how do we know it isn't what's happening?
The West, we need to bring freedom and democracy to the people of Iran. When has this worked? Where have we brought freedom and democracy to? Like, is this the time? Oh, this time we're going to.
I don't even think the United States has any assets that they're prepared or willing to physically deploy in that location.
I just want to show you guys something. We're going to interrupt
Afghanistan.
Yeah, we got kind of off track.
Guys, I'm going to interrupt you guys real quick for a brief second just to show you this really dumb shirt meme.
Okay.
Like, I know you can barely see it, but the losers in 2022. That is the Canadian trucker protest. Why are you even comparing
it?
It's like
oh my god.
It's like, are you really comparing
yes. I remember when General Robert E. Lee showed up in a Kenworth to fucking Gettysburg, I guess.
Why'd you show me that? Why'd you show me that?
It's just dumb. It's like that's like Jimmy Kimmel tier. That's like a Jimmy Kimmel shirt. That's what I call it.
It is Adolf Honkler.
As Stick Hexenhammer would say, honk honk. Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry to interrupt. That was it was something I was browsing the internet and I found that. So
to pivot us back then on the tech thing, because Aiden mentioned Huawei earlier on, and I kind of didn't engage properly on it. I skipped over.
Yeah, that's fine. We got kind of in the weeds.
So what I want to do is actually, since you talked about that, there's the recent Intel news, the one with Biden attempted to do this thing that I'm sure that the whole ruling class in the US would probably want to do, which is to shore up Intel's prospects because they're afraid of, well, I don't need to explain, but they're obviously afraid of being competed with by people who are not based in the United States, I suppose. And so they decide they're going to do some job reshoring by essentially giving Intel a whole giant bucket full of money and telling them to like hire people inside the United States, right? And so Intel has reacted to this by taking the giant bucket of money and then laying off 200,000 people. So, like, what is the general feeling in the room on that?
What do you mean Intel? Who are you talking
As in
about?
Intel Corporation that
Okay.
manufactures processors. They took
Oh,
they took a
okay.
whole
I was
bucket of money
confused.
from
I
the
thought you were
government
talking
just
about like
now.
intelligence, like military
No.
intelligence. For a
No.
second.
Yeah, same.
It's like Intel Corporation has taken a whole bucket of money from the government under the auspices of, oh, this is for the purpose of essentially reshoring, quote unquote, American jobs. And then Intel reacted to this by saying, yes, of course we believe in this. And then they took the buckets of money, observed market conditions, and decided that, oh, demand has fallen, so we're laying off 200,000 people. So, like, what's the general feeling on that in this room in general? Like, is there a limitation to how much like reshoring is even possible in the economy that now exists?
I mean, I've been talking a lot. If someone else wants to talk, I can answer that though.
I mean, I'm not a economics guy. At the end of the day, I care about social matters. That's my thing.
My background, I studied economics in one of the top 5 econ schools in the United States, so I can engage with that, I guess. If you
Do
want
it,
I'm
do
a
it.
fucking HVAC tech, dude. I can't engage in this.
Dude, I had my okay, I can't say that without doxing myself, but one of my professors is a very well-known economist. That's all I'm gonna say. But George knows who it is. George is probably watching, and he better not type in the comments who my professor was / maybe is. Anyway, what was your economics?
The question was how much reshoring is even possible? Because of course, Aiden spoke earlier about trying to sort of build productive forces back inside the United States, which of course has higher standards of living, thus higher prices, and also we have the economy being the way that it is. There's also a fall in demand, and there's also inflation and all this other stuff, providing headwinds against it. So, I mean, is reshoring even possible, given that Biden's attempted to do it right now by essentially just throwing taxpayers' money toward Intel, who have essentially eaten that taxpayers' money, and then responded by firing people instead of actually hiring them.
So this is a complicated issue because on one point there's a heavily economic side to it. On the other hand, it's very cultural. Because if I'm going to look at it from an objective economic perspective, I'm not saying this disclaimer. I'm not saying this from any ideological perspective. In terms of raising GDP, and again, because this is an imperialist method, traditionally, especially in terms of building robust imperial economies, a great thing for the economy is weakening labor unions. And when I say good for the economy, I mean GDP, not necessarily for individual people, but GDP. Breaking down and busting unions, not open borders, free immigration, bringing in a new caste of workers from third world countries. Number 3, free trade. In many ways, I am pro doing some of those things to a certain extent because I'm still a nationalist, but I am pro Latin American immigration in the United States. So long as they're not criminals, so long as they agree to assimilate, so long as they sign a waiver saying that, like, before they even get the right to vote, they need to learn the English language, like, or even military service, because I'm kind of a Starship Troopers stan. But either way, doing those things, and again, this is me getting away from the ideological side again, that is good for GDP. Especially the weakening of unions. But the reason traditionally labor unions and leftists were against immigration until like the early 2000s was because immigration fundamentally weakens labor unions. And I think probably that's where Aiden is coming from. He's coming from the more pro-worker perspective.
Well, not just that, but also like if you introduce more workers into the economy, then it devalues the labor of the actual citizens within the nation.
Okay, so I mean that's kind of from the labor theory of value perspective, which I think is completely bunk. But at the same time, from a spiritual perspective, if I'm going to get out of the materialistic analysis, from a spiritual.
Yeah,
perspective,
I also
maybe.
hate it too, but I had to
Because
throw
What
that
about
in
the
there.
perspective?
like if you're going to take a look at Aquinas economics, which I'm sure Kilhoun probably subscribes to.
What about the claim that some people would make, which is that in the fourth industrial revolution that's coming up now, a lot of the jobs that people would have assumed would have been unionized would not be. Like, for example, like how many jobs at Intel that are critical for like the development of their next generation CPUs, for example, which may or may not be trounced by AMD's offering. How many of their jobs are like protected by a union or would ever be protected by
They're
a
not
union?
going to be unionized
Can I
because the
respond?
companies
Can
don't
I
allow
respond
it.
to this Intel?
We live in a fundamentally
thing?
anti-union society.
So, first of all, I think your spiritual perspective is going to lead you closer to the truth than whatever that dipshit economist taught you. And second of all, about the Intel stuff, politics is not about policy. This is a common misconception. It's about power. No matter what they say the policy is, if the same people are in power, it's going to end up serving their interests. So,
I'm serious, dude. You are a Spenglerian without even knowing it. I'm sorry. You need to read. You need to read The Decline of the West, and you need to spread it to all of your MAGA communist
I'm
comrades.
sure. I think Haas has read it. He's very influenced by the German Conservative Revolution.
I'm gonna have to have Haas on at some point.
You should. You should.
I think I'd have a good conversation with that guy.
You could go. Anyone can go on his stream. So if you want to just hop in show queue, he'd have you on.
I might send him an email too to see if he wants to do a one-on-one over here too.
But yeah, so like there's lots of like socialist sounding policies that get thrown around to try and get people to support things that are in the end not going to turn out quite how they thought it would. And that's what this Intel thing sounds like. Like, yeah, they'll say it's pro-worker or whatever, but there's no worker power in this country. I mean, all the unions are completely co-opted by the Democrats. We've got the Amazon union now, which, I mean, Chris Smalls was meeting with Biden.
It's a controlled opposition, the Amazon union.
Amazon union. I'm going to hold out judgment. We'll see. But the vast majority of the unions are, they're pretty much just Democrat arms of the Democratic Party. So, no, there isn't really any worker power. And if there's no worker power, no, these people aren't going to magnanimously like gift their class enemies victories like that. I mean, they'll use whatever tools they have rhetorically, but materially, no matter what they're saying, it's going to be serving the people who control these politicians, the people who finance their campaigns, who hire the lobbyists that literally write the laws. This is this is why it's not when these people talk a big we got to bring democracy to Iran or whatever. We don't have democracy here. When they talk about democracy, they're not talking about like rule by the people. They're talking about rule by them. And this is like the only way the word gets used. I mean, we got to bring democracy to Iraq at the barrel of a gun. What does that even mean? That doesn't even make sense. They're bringing.
So my analysis is democracy doesn't even, from a metaphysical perspective, and again, so my perspective used to be the reason that democracy doesn't work in the Middle East is because they are still part of the third world, and you have to have like more first world institutions in order to have a fundamentally working democracy. Like that's a prerequisite. However, my position now is
we don't have a democracy here, though.
I mean, no, but so that's why my perspective nowadays is more so democracy is kind of a sham. But at the same time, even in order to have the illusion of a democracy, it has to be in the West. It's impossible to spread ideas of democracies to non-Western countries because they don't spiritually, metaphysically, like deep down. And I say this like more of like from a romanticist or an idealist perspective, just speaking of like German idealism, but democracy means nothing to them. It's that's not a good thing or a bad thing. It just isn't within their like mimetic biology. Because this isn't me like supporting a caliphate or anything, but a caliphate is natural to the Islamic world, and that is what they would be happiest under.
Well, I think democracy means different things in different countries and in different civilizations. I mean, we look at China or North Korea and we say, "Oh, this is an authoritarian dictatorship," but I mean, compare or Russia, but compare Xi Jinping or Putin's.
Chinese love their system.
Exactly. Compare the approval rating of the government to the fucking congressional approval rating in the U.S., which is abysmal. It's like 12% or something. It's ridiculous.
I think the last time I checked, it was actually 9.
Because like we need to understand that like our equivalent in the West, we love the idea of freedom. But in China, the idea of freedom, they view it in the same way that we view authoritarianism. It's disdainable because they like the idea that collectivist ideology, that concept of authority, it goes back all the way to Confucius.
It reminds me,
Possibly
actually.
even before that.
You wouldn't even have to go back that far, because remember that quote controversy that was a non-controversy in Germany, with that guy whose name I've forgotten, from a party whose name I've forgotten, got up and stood up during the COVID crisis, and I think someone asked him on the floor something like, how would you define freedom? What is the appropriate definition of freedom? And this guy stood up, and a lot of memes appeared after he said this. He got up there and he said, I prefer to think of it in the Hegelian sense, which is that freedom should be understood as the ability to do that which is necessary.
Oh, so apparently Hegel's controversial now. I thought everyone loved
And
Hegel.
so everyone started freaking
Hegel's
out, and this guy was
mainstream-
just standing there. I'm going to try to find this. I'm going to try to find the image, because there's going to be memes
Hegel
of
is
this.
Hegel is like super mainstream as a philosopher, but only smart mainstream people read him because nobody else understands whatever the fuck I'm too dumb to understand what the fuck Hegel says half the time. He's not as bad as Heidegger, and I love Heidegger, but I only understand like 1/6 of what Heidegger says because I'm kind of a moron. So,
Well, I think German idealism and German metaphysical writings tend to be some of the hardest things to get into generally.
This is why John David Ebert is mentoring me.
It was Karl Lauterbach who apparently created this quote unquote controversy. I'm going to see if I can find the meme. There were so many memes. It should be easy to find it.
Just by the way, so I was thinking about going for another hour. If you guys are good with that, are you guys?
I'm gonna have to head out soon. I gotta work early tomorrow.
Yeah,
Okay,
I also only have like 20 minutes.
Okay, let's go to like the 2:10 hour mark then. Let's go. I'll try to get you guys for another 30.
I can do that.
But I wanted to just talk about a little bit about Trump's socialist policies, because I fundamentally believe that Trump, at least in practice, has been very socialistic, specifically with his protectionist mercantilism, number one. Secondly, and again, I'm not saying he is a socialist, but I'm saying that Trump definitely exhibits some tendencies. Number two, the populism, just the rhetoric. Number three, his willingness, because he did and it was like Steve Bannon who was trying to push him on this nationalization of railroads. Nobody talks about that, but it's true. So he's at least open to some nationalization. Number four, farm subsidies, which no one else talks about farm subsidies. That was one of his biggest policy issues. And of course, I think people like Tucker and Bannon were kind of turning him away from the capitalist mindset, and I think that was kind of something they were successful on. So I guess that's kind of just like the last thing I want to discuss, because again, that is the theme of the stream technically, but we've been talking, we've been, as most of these shows go,
they kind of go everywhere.
Topics, but that's kind of our niche. That's our gimmick. That's what's fun
So,
about.
by the way, Politicrat, here's something that I don't think you actually know about the U.S. But from 1976 to 1999, we actually did have a nationalized railroad.
So
Found the quote.
Oh, share it, Ray.
Yep, it's from Karl Lauterbach, as I said, yeah. And he said the following: we regain freedom through vaccination. It is the virus that confines us. Hegel once said, and in this respect he is right, freedom is the recognition of necessity. And
As someone who has,
and
as
then the
somebody,
entire thing erupted.
As somebody who spent a year reading Phenomenology of the Spirit, that is probably the most Hegel thing I've ever heard since Hegel.
Yeah, it was so incredibly based that it was actually unbelievable. Like, people had to stand back in complete stupefaction. It was fantastic.
I wasn't even for vaccine mandates, but like, I can respect the shamelessness and the shameless Hegelianism of that quote.
And I'm saying that basically China is on that kind of move, essentially, and that's
because
why
it's a fundamentally Chinese concept. Like that is that mindset.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a reason as to why I would have found that compelling as well. I mean, it's very similar as well to how in Japan recently, what's his name, Friedrich von Weiser was kind of like seeing a mini revival in Japan as well, as a person who gets quoted because, of course, he is the only Austrian economist who rejected liberalism in its entirety, saying that liberalism has to be superseded by a system of order. Well, no, I don't think Hopper like rejected liberalism, did he? He didn't say like because I mean, let's put it this way: Weiser rejected it like on a complete level. Like he was like, freedom has to be superseded by a system of order,
But
and then he
Hopper's like a
received his
conservative,
right.
like a cultural,
Okay,
social, anti-democratic.
Here's the
conservative.
thing. Here's the thing that I don't think you realize, Politicrat. You can be conservative and not reject liberalism. Because that's called
Disagree.
99%
No, I know that.
of
No,
conservatism.
I know that. But
Disagree.
I'm talking about the or like just the precepts of it. He disagrees with the precept. Like for instance, I'm a liberal, or I'm like a non-liberal who accepts liberalism. Like if that's the best way. I'm not quite to the extent of like Hoppe, but but you can't 100% disagree with lesbianism. No, liberal.
Oh, you can 100%
Well, who can-
disagree with
who
the
can disagree with
lesbianism. I
that?
can
No,
tell you that.
no, liberalism and like American conservatism, and honestly, Monsieur Z just came out with a good video on this about a week ago. Like American conservatism is still fundamentally a liberal ideology.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean that's kind of obvious because I mean an American conservative is just saying, "Oh yeah, I want to keep a liberal constitution." It's not like
the ancien regime for America is the Constitution.
The ancien regime for America is John Adams.
Can I respond to this? I want to respond to this. Trump is a socialist.
Absolutely.
Question, which I mean, it's what the stream is about. But I sort of alluded to this earlier. But I think this whole capitalism versus socialism debate is pretty much a spook. It's pretty purely in the realm of ideology. Like when people have this debate, what they're really saying is it's like the capitalist people. It's like a sort of individualist, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, like kind of ideology versus this sort of collectivist, like free stuff from the government. And meanwhile, the economy is ignoring this entire debate and just plowing full steam ahead. I think it's a waste of time. I think we instead of having this ideological debate of capitalism versus socialism, which that's what it is. It's really just like your values and your what you think is important. We should be talking about like materially. Do you oppose BlackRock buying up all the farmland? Do you oppose the Great Reset? You'll own nothing and you be happy, live in the pot and eat the bugs kind of shit. This is what the important discussion is, and people aren't having it because on these social media apps, which are completely controlled by the ruling class, this sort of capitalism versus socialism thing is promoted just as a matter of division. I think if we talked about the important things, like do you want to own nothing and be happy? I mean, I already own nothing. I don't know when they're planning on making me happy about it, but we all agree on that. So like, you want to argue about capital, like these sort of metaphysical values, capitalism versus socialism. I don't think it's salient at all. I don't think it's an important debate to have. I think, if you want to argue about what utopia we should establish after this ruling class is overthrown that we were all opposed to, I don't think it's, let's have that discussion afterwards.
Yeah, no, it's like us, like we're natural allies in the immediate sense, and then we can fight. We can fight each other to the death once we finally get rid of it.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Okay. But I mean, are you saying that there should be no prefiguration that goes on then? Because earlier on in this interview, earlier on in this live stream, I'm so in that mode still. So early on in this live stream, Aiden said that I'm trying to remember if he said it in this exact way, that he believes the line that was advanced by Mao Zedong. I think he said
Maoist, yes.
Yeah, and so he was the one that came up with the prefiguration, which is building the sort of the understanding of how you want the post-revolutionary system to look in miniature. So, I mean, it's one of those things where if you follow that to its logical conclusion, I mean, you would come to the conclusion that you have to know you have to have some idea of what you want the post transition to look like. And
Mao believed in the mass line. Mao was not someone who wanted to impose his ideological vision onto Chinese society. He was someone.
I disagree with that. I think
he was someone who was. Well, this is what he wrote about the mass line. It's what the mass line is, which I completely subscribe to, is you are going to go into the masses, and as much as you might teach them about your ideas. You're also going to learn from them, and you can't this is sort of a utopian socialist idea that we have this idea that we're going to impose on society, because in the process of power changing hands, things are going to change. Things that seem to be important now, it's going to be different just in as we push forward this process in whatever way manifests itself to us of overthrowing the people who are currently in power, which I think any populist will agree is something that needs to happen. It's going to change. And this is also, MAGA communism is the mass line. We want to go to MAGA rallies. I've been to MAGA rallies. I've talked to MAGA people. Yeah, they tell me shit that I learned from them. I learned more from them than I learned from my fucking professors at college. They know what's going on. They have they're materialists there. They have things they care about that.
Populist.
I'm a city
Exactly.
dweller. I don't know exactly what's going on out in the countryside. So yeah, it's not like MAGA communism is not like, oh, we're going to get the MAGA people, we're going to make them all communists. Like, we've got the correct ideas for the MAGA communists, or for MAGA, it's communism, and this is what we're going to do. No, it's a dialectic relationship. It's we're going to learn from the masses, and we're going to bypass these sort of university Marxist gatekeepers. We're going to go straight to the masses, and we're going to learn, what's really important to the traditional Marxist working class.
So it's really more of a colloquialism then, the term itself, because I know you guys aren't like 100% in alignment, of course, with like the fucking Antifa cucks who are around.
Oh, we hate them. We have number one enemies. Number one.
No. Hold on, Ray. Hold on, Ray. I just want to say this is why I think like terms like, and again, this is not me like telling you go out and tell everyone my term because I want to be famous. I did invent the term boomercon, by the way, which I am proud of. No, but I'm just saying this is why I think something like Gadsden socialism or industrial leftist, from an ideological perspective, like MAGA communism is a great hashtag, but like
no, it's good. Those are good.
But from like an ideological perspective, industrial leftist or Gadsden communist.
That's what we are. I think you have a grip on the aesthetic. I think you're. I might start saying that
because I know you guys legitimately believe in. Again, we disagree 100% on economics, but you guys, I get the sense you guys believe that you are the fulfillment of the revolution in 1776. You guys
Absolutely.
are like fundamentally rooted in the whole Thomas Paine ideology in a sense.
Absolutely.
At least that's what I that's
1776 2036.
What?
We're gonna finish the project of 1776 in 2036. Absolutely. This is also something from Mao and from Lenin too. They weren't just these like taking like foreign German ideologies from Marx. They were patriotic people who Mao especially really learned a lot about the history of it. He really immersed himself in the Chinese culture that was very much suppressed by the British during the Century of Humiliation. And this is why we say communism is conservative.
Is this why you guys are for patriotic education too?
Yes.
Okay. You want to elaborate a little bit on that?
On patriotic education?
Yeah.
Well, what's happening right now is you've got this like 1619 project. You've got the Gerald Horne counter-revolution of 1776.
I was literally just about to ask you about that. Yeah, I was going to ask, what do you say to people like Gerald Horne, who said that 1776 was a counter-revolution because it was essentially landowners trying to take back from the British Empire the ability to do their own little fiefdom, etc.
Yeah, he's a loyalist. He's a loyalist to the British Crown. That's what I say.
So how would you push back against his argument, for example? Because he may well argue that the development of productive forces would have been faster were it not for this schism.
Under the British Empire, I think that's absurd. I think that's absurd.
So do you think they were better against the development of productive forces, more so than, say, Jeffersonian democracy?
You think that we would have... you think that... So the argument is that the British Empire was
one way or the other. I'm just asking whether
the argument is that the British Empire was progressive, right? That's the argument, essentially.
I'm saying that their argument would be that the British Empire was more progressive.
That's how I describe it. Economically libertarian, imperialist, culturally progressive for their time. Like my profile picture is Rudyard Kipling, and I'm kind of like half jestingly making a video essay on how Rudyard Kipling was like the most woke poet of all time, even though his standard as being a racist.
I agree with you. I agree with you because I think wokeism is white supremacy. I think wokeism is the white man's burden. It's just gotten a reskin in the modern age.
I mean, Horn and others would
I
also argue.
unironically like that poem. Not his best, but I like it. It's fun.
I mean, Horn and others would also argue that in 1776 allowed the United States to engage in westward expansion, which was statistically less likely to have occurred if the British Empire had won, because they would have been too busy in India.
What statistics?
King George.
What
Hold on, I'm sorry,
statistics
Aiden. I
are you
just want to
talking
say
about?
brief response to Ray.
Mhm.
George III was 100% against the colonies expanding their land because he was a good friend of the Native Americans. Whereas you have the Jeffersonian Democrat. Thomas Jefferson was the original American imperialist. And this is where a lot of my fellow libertarians disagree. Whereas that's not the case. He was an imperialist as opposed to a hard nationalist.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
no, he was an anti-imperialist. He was against
this is why I'm saying,
British Empire.
This is why
no. He was against the British Empire, but he was pro-American imperialism.
Indeed, and also without that westward expansion and hitting the Pacific Ocean, they would not have been able to make the leap that they later made into Hawaii and then into the Philippines, which then unleashed an era of, well, I'm sure I don't need to describe the amount of suffering and destruction that was brought to Asia because of the fact that the United States
I'm
was
sorry.
weaker.
I believe we should have kept the Philippines. This is where you and I disagree.
Well, I
The
mean, it was
Philippines should have become U.S.
those
states.
people. Let me be very clear on this as well. When the United States entered the Philippines, one of their commanders, and the first thing they did when they landed there, and the whole conflict began, because obviously the Filipinos thought that they were actually going to be released from Spanish imperialism, only to find themselves re-subjected to American imperialism. And then the Americans declared essentially that, it would be very nice if they could eliminate 50% of the population of the islands. I mean, that's essentially genocide, right?
I think to add insult to injury, so I 40% agree with you on this. I'm pulling these percentages out of my ass, but you know what I mean.
But
I 40% agree with you on this in the sense where, yes, you're right, but one of the biggest sins is we take over them, we conquer them, we don't better their industry, and we just pull out. We just pull out like in the 50s when we could have made them states. Like, why do you think all these the Filipinos are coming to the United States to get money to send back to their families? It's because I've talked to so many Filipinos. They talk about how their country would be so much better if it just got integrated into the larger American project.
Well, I mean, it would have been even better if they had never been subjected to this to this form of imperialism, if they would actually develop their own resources without being continually sabotaged.
Well, then they would just be subject under Japanese imperialism.
I disagree.
Within 20 years.
I disagree with Gerald Horne 100%. I think all these things you are describing are a result of 1776 not going far enough, not breaking us enough with the British Empire. For example,
you're like a Thomas Paine as opposed to a Hamilton, because Hamilton is like.
No, I like Hamilton.
Really, because Hamilton was like super far right in 1776 compared to someone like Paine, who was super far left.
And also, just before I forget to say this, the thing that I was actually building up to when I was saying that.
Ray, let
go ahead.
I'm trying to keep order.
Yeah, what I was going to say is just like Teddy Roosevelt. He was responsible for the Philippines, right? He was completely in line with the British crown and the British oligarchy and how he thought. He was a Malthusian. He was a racial essentialist. All these ideas come from Britain. I mean, the British Empire hegemony is not just the explicit military hegemony, because you can see today. I mean, Britain. Where is Britain's military? Exactly. Britain's well, it's not just corporate. It's like cultural. It's Anglo science. It's Anglo positivism, and it's very much financial and banking. Because I mean, I'm of the opinion that the British Empire never fell, and we're still.
America is the British Empire. This is where Alex Jones was kind of based. He said on like a stream with Joe Rogan, he was like, back with America in 1940 with the OSS after Dunkirk, America merged with the British Empire.
Absolutely.
So now this is becoming a little bit more confusing now, because you always say that you're saying that the 1619 project people are wrong, even though essentially you all have fundamentally disagreed with anything I've said here. Like, I remember that we were being taught about the things that you all now call the 1619 project, like before it was cool.
It's not about. It's not
like in 2000.
Okay, look, legitimacy.
Hold on. In 2002, for example, when I was like, when I was still like what you all call high school, we were being taught, and again, at that time, I was living in a third world country, so I was essentially being taught the curriculum of people who had designed that curriculum in the third world, and we'd already arrived at the conclusion that the American Revolution was a counter-revolution before Gerald Horne actually said it, because that was
What
already a
country?
view that was held in common
When you
in,
say,
in
if you
certain
don't mind,
developing countries.
if you don't mind me asking, what
Yeah, I
country?
didn't respond.
Yeah, I won't be specific, but
He's our
it was
guest tonight, right? So
yeah, oh sure. I mean, I won't be specific about it because obviously it further enables like certain people who are still trying to dig on these things. But it's a country in the South America and or Caribbean. But we were essentially told about the things that you all now call the 1619 Project back then, before it was actually popular to criticize those things. And so when I saw Gerald Horde come out with that, and he said, "Oh, it's a counter-revolution," I was like, "Why is he going to say that?" And then he explained that, "Oh, development of productive forces was like hampered by the emergence of this sort of giant American land grab." I was like, "Well, yeah, we've been knowing that."
Okay.
Right?
What? It's not necessarily about what's like technically true. It's what we're told is that the legitimacy of the state comes from this social contract. We all at some point sign this contract, I guess, and that's where the state comes from. But in my opinion, that's bullshit. The legitimacy of the state comes from myth, from our founding myth. So the reason the state has legitimacy is because you go to school, you learn about Jefferson, you learn about Washington, you learn about Paul Revere's Midnight Ride. These are myths that every American knows, right? Every American knows about Paul
we need
Revere's
to
Midnight
remember
Ride.
that myths are not a bad thing because they explain in a lot of ways truth better than literal history does.
Absolutely. But here's the thing: what the 1619 Project is, and what the counter-revolution of
Deconstruction of the
1776
myth.
is, exactly. It's an attack on American sovereignty by deconstructing this myth to explicitly give us back. I mean, we're already essentially part of the British Empire, but explicitly make it. And I'll tell you, I think Meghan Markle is going to run in 2028, and that's going to be when it's made explicit. And we will explicitly be returned to the British Crown. It's already in practice. What the 1619 Project is about undermining American sovereignty, which this country was founded by declaring war on the British Empire. You can talk about all the what happened after and what the ideology these people might be, but materially what the founding of this country rests on is opposition to the British Empire. We didn't want to be part of the British Empire anymore, and that needs to be revived today.
This is a counter to that.
I just want to say an interesting conversation would be between you and Paul Fahrenheit, who has a pretty big following on he's like an aristocratic Democrat, like pro like Southern.
Dude, you should have had him on.
Yeah, he had drill this morning, so he's tired.
I'll talk to him. I'll come back on and talk to him.
No, but I'm saying on economics, he's like a weird cross between a liberal and like a national socialist. He's not as racist, of course, as National Socialism, but he definitely has he has like some racialist views, but he's essentially an aristocratic Southern Democrat. He's a registered Democrat, votes straight blue. But I think you guys could get along on certain things, especially in terms of your respective Jeffersonian views, because I'm getting the sense that what MAGA communism really is almost a fulfillment of a certain interpretation of Jeffersonian populism.
Right. We don't want socialism with Chinese characteristics. We want socialism with American characteristics.
Okay, I understand what you mean by that because it's very similar. Like even Winston Churchill said fascism emerges, and so this is fascism specifically, but he says fascism emerges with the characteristics of the country in which it is formed. That's why like fascism ever rose in Britain or America. It's not going to resemble National Socialism or Italian national fascism.
Yeah, sure.
And so I think it's the same thing with socialism. It's definitely going to have a very American working class, again, Gadsden socialism, that aesthetic.
Yeah. I've agreed with you guys a lot, I think.
I think all of us kind of, we all disagree on a lot of things. Like I'm 100% disagree with you on economics, Aiden. But I think we agree on some of the same basic premises, and there are certain factors we can kind of all align on if we are to build like a common project and then fight each other afterwards.
So
Sure.
I'm just going to make this case. I know it's like we're talking about the mythology of history, but I especially hate using the terms "we" because I fundamentally subscribe to elite theory, and I view the American Revolution through the elite theory context. And even like John Adams admitted that only about a third of the American population supported the revolution, and about a third were against it, and a third were indifferent but it was an elitely run revolution, which I know we already talked about that earlier.
Yeah,
But
I would
my
agree with
piece.
you on that as well. I mean, this is why I mentioned at the beginning that why I characterized it as a landowner-run revolution at the beginning as well, because I didn't want to sort of subscribe to this idea that it was a grassroots uprising, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
no, the
obviously,
American Revolution.
there is a famous movie that depicts it as such, as
Well,
we all know which one we're talking about
No,
here.
we
The
need
one,
to remember what Marx discussed. Karl Marx, and this is where, even in a sense, so I might be, spoiler alert, I might be having Steve Bannon on at some point in the future. I'm a small channel, but he and I are both he and I are both like Evolian, Gunnonian traditionalists, capital T. So we agree on some things. That's how I'm
Yeah,
going to
I'm not even going to remember half of the words you just said.
Okay, whatever. You don't have to. No, but basically, because I know I'm only 1 degree removed from him. I can contact people
Mhm.
to get him on. I've met like I will. I'm yeah, but either way, long story short, one of my biggest criticisms of his ideal is that he believes that the metaphysical, I guess, root of America is the white working class. So I understand where he's coming from, but America was founded on a fundamentally bourgeois revolution. Marx talked about this. The first revolutions prior to his predicted communist revolutions were revolutions of the middle class. America, France, the farmers in South America with like the Bolivarians. They were all nationalist bourgeois revolutions. And I think that is something that we need to remember. And especially as communists, you guys need to remember is that the proletariat would not exist without the bourgeois. And that's something that even Marx recognized because he wrote an entire essay praising the middle class, the petite bourgeois, for building up the economy and for improving working conditions, comparatively speaking, to feudalism. And this is where Calhoun is going to hate me, but I just mean in terms of you lefties here.
Well, what Marx also said is he said the Star Spangled Banner carries the destiny of the European working class. He wrote that in his letter to Abraham Lincoln.
Really? I was not aware they were in correspondence. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, he was writing to Lincoln during the Civil War, and
Lincoln was like was a leftist for his time. So,
well, Lincoln even praised the Communist Manifesto in one of his letters to Marx, but also critiqued it in some things.
If Lincoln hadn't died, he would have or if Lincoln hadn't been assassinated, he would have probably been loved by the South eventually for his support of Southern agrarianism.
I mean, isn't it the case that that Marx wrote that letter in the first instance because Lincoln was seen as the person who was overcoming slavery?
Yes.
Right, and obviously slavery.
Marx was kind of a racist, though. I'm not going to lie. I don't mean that in the woke sense. I'm not canceling Marx, but I'm just saying, like, Marx hated black people.
I mean, but the reason I've highlighted the fact that Marx wrote that letter for a specific reason surrounding slavery, though, is because if you look at the letters he wrote for British politicians around the same time period as well, I mean, he was very critical of the ones who were sort of doing petty moralism and pretending they weren't involved in slavery when they actually were, and so on and so forth. But by the same logic, I mean, if Abraham Lincoln can receive praise from Karl Marx for fighting that Civil War, then wouldn't the British Empire also receive praise for abolishing slavery without having a civil war? You see what I mean?
The British Empire still hasn't abolished slavery.
What?
The British Empire still hasn't abolished.
I mean, that happened in 1833.
Interesting. I want to hear you guys argue this. I'm going to shut up.
1833.
We only got 2 minutes left.
Okay, go on. What's your logic on that?
They said it, but in practice, the British Empire still has not abolished slavery. They still rely on slavery. These financial institutions that operate from the City of London rely on slavery all over the world. There's more slaves today than there were at any point in history. The British Empire still has not abolished slavery.
Wait, would that apply to the entire capitalist system as a whole?
The British Empire abolished slavery before America is complete bullshit. They officially did. They said they did. They
Are you
profited
referring
off
to
it
wage
still all over the
slavery?
world.
Are you referring to wage slavery?
No,
Specifically?
literally.
Wait.
I mean,
I can
that's a
actually
whole other
expand on
argument. But
this.
no, like literal slaves. The Nestle just argued in front of the Supreme Court that they're not responsible for the slaves in their supply chain.
That's fucked up.
You know,
Yeah,
I
that's
can
what-
actually
how would that not?
wait.
Hold on, but
That's-
how would
and
that
the-
not
the
also
argument they
implicate the
made-
United
Can I
States
The
as well?
argument that their lawyer made
on.
was that all the companies that funded the Third Reich in Nazi Germany didn't get prosecuted in the Nuremberg trials. So this is the
Doyle?
precedent they're using.
Because it was
to justify
American
having
companies who
slavery in their,
supported them. Ford, Doyle Fruit Company, all these people.
Well,
Okay.
they're all in bed
So,
with the city of London.
wait,
it's an
wait,
But I mean,
Anglo-American
how does that
empire.
exonerate Washington
my
in this then?
fucking
Because I
God,
mean,
come
that's
on.
Nestle arguing in the Supreme Court in the United States. So surely that also implicates the
I'm
United
not
States.
because we've been
Okay,
captured
Ray-
by the.
yeah,
It's,
okay,
it's,
guys,
it's Wall
both of you,
Street.
Hey.
It's Wall Street and the
Ray.
city
Hey.
of London.
Aiden and Ray, be quiet and
Okay.
let.
Yeah,
I
let
don't mean to
me
be a I don't mean
goddamn
to be a dick.
talk.
I like all you guys, but like I need to be a dick when I'm moderator of the stream. So Ms. Izzy in Chicago, say what you're gonna say. You wanted to
Yeah.
expand on the point.
Well, to expand on the British Empire not really abolishing slavery, let's look at the Gulf states and when they abolished slavery, even when they were part of the British Empire. The 1960s
Mm.
for
Oh,
Oman
they got
and the
slaves
Trucial
building
states.
They got slaves building the World Cup in Qatar. They still
Yeah, I mean
have
that's
them.
still going on right now. Yeah, very true.
Yeah. So, yeah, I would actually say that yes, America did abolish slavery in practice and in theory before the British Empire did.
Yeah, based.
But then again, we need to debate like what the definition is. Okay, this is going to be so controversial. We're going to need to be like either super sober or super drunk for this. But like, we're going to need a stream to debate what slavery.
Yeah,
Dude,
but
I am
also- and
super
also, if we're
tired and
arguing-
need to go to
I'm
bed.
gonna have to head out. I'm gonna have to head
Well, I'll
out.
just say one
No,
more
yeah,
thing. then.
okay. So what we will
Also,
do is
if
we
we're-
will say goodbye to Ms. Izzy in Chicago and Aiden Stone, and I'd say for the next 20 minutes, me, Kilhoun, and Ray will kind of do like a little like after show on the same stream, of course, but just to discuss Trump and communism or Trump and socialism. If you guys are down for it, the two of you.
Okay, I mean, I
That's
can't
fine
go for
with
the
me.
full amount of time, but I'll try. Sure.
Okay, just 20 minutes or so. But Ms. Izzy in Chicago, Aiden Stone, thank you so much for coming on. Ms. Izzy, man, a few words, but you always have something to say when you actually have something to say.
Man of few words and is always pissed when talking. Yep.
Yes. And then Aiden Stone, thank you so much for coming on. It was actually very enlightening to have you on because, of course, you're never going to convince me of the communism aspect or even really the Trump aspect of MAGA communism, but I totally understand where you're coming from, where your movement is coming from. I think it is potentially even viable. And again, I think Gadsden socialism is like a much better way of framing it, or industrial leftism. But MAGA communism is kind of a funny hashtag, so I think that works. But I do think that you guys, in some ways, like again, pulling percentages out of my ass, 70% we're aligned on a lot of things. Natural allies.
That's a good percent.
and
Well, thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure.
I'd love to have you on again in the future to talk about other topics pertaining to this and other things because I think you give an interesting perspective. If you're ever interested, you're in my Discord, so message me. I'll probably ask you a couple times depending on what the subject is and if I need panelists. But again, thank you for coming on. Hope you had a good time. And it's interesting that you could get your word out. Maybe we'll end up forging some alliances here.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. As well as you, Ms. Izzy in Chicago. And he left.
All right, so the recap.
Okay, let's break this down. Let's break this down, lady and other gentlemen.
So I mean, from the way I look at it, it's definitely something we've never seen before. I guess that could be said.
Huey Long might be an exception. It's
I mean-
very similar to Huey Longism, I think.
And I do kind of see this thing that they're doing, which obviously I don't agree with it, but there's this thing that causes people keep doing where they're drawing this comparison and they keep doing this thing where it's like the United States versus the British Empire, and then when something bad is happening that is seen to be inside the United States, they'll kind of say, oh, well, that's a sort of residue of the British Empire, which has to be sort of like removed in some way, and it's not part of like what America is or whatever, etc., etc. That's the impression I'm getting. I mean, I don't like to like go on that line, given that obviously Aiden is no longer here to sort of rebut on that, so I'm being a little unfair since in the after stream to say that. But
well, you're not wrong.
It does seem like they're positing this thing. I mean, the only people we've seen that have done that previously, so maybe we have seen it before, but just in a very different form. Like, doesn't LaRoucheism do something similar to that?
What is
And also
LaRouche?
something.
I sound like a retard for asking this.
Lyndon LaRouche. He was a guy that had a political grouping where I think his argument was that the Shadow Empire, which is remnants of the British Empire, are still in some ways hijacking or controlling the US in some form or fashion, and that's like one of the central components of his belief system. It's something you also see in certain conspiracy circles in the US, like with Alex Jones and so on and so forth, where they claim that the British Empire somehow still continues to exist within the borders of the United States, which I don't agree is possible. I don't think that's possible, but but rhetorically, it allows them to do certain things they otherwise wouldn't be able to do, like what we saw in this stream, where basically it's possible to then sort of put bad things onto that instead of saying that these are fundamental elements of the American experience.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I mean, I see this a lot when American panelists go on channels like, say, AA streams, like, say, Paul Fahrenheit, where essentially defend American chauvinism and claim it's something else that's controlling it from the shadows and not take any responsibility for America's actions or when it's brought up.
Paul Fahrenheit is a really good friend of mine in real life. We'll go to sporting events together. We'll go to the bar together. We'll go to Virginia Beach together. Like we'll hang out. But the thing is, like with him, he's like so far right, he loops back around and becomes a liberal centrist. If that makes sense, like,
well, he believes that America is like
he's
this.
fundamentally a neoliberal who believes in Southern aristocracy. If that makes any sense at all.
I mean, yes, but I mean, from at least my tacit knowledge of him, he also he believes in the American system so much that that's why he becomes a liberal.
This is what and he'll even say he's a liberal. Like, of course I'm not gonna dox Paul, say anything about him that he would not want, but he would feel comfortable telling you he is a capital D Democrat.
Yes, I've heard him say that before.
So I considered becoming. I almost went in that direction too. Like, I'm not as right wing as him. I mean, I'm to the right of him on economics, but on issues like maybe like race and gay marriage and stuff, I'm to the left of him.
And then you get to me, like I was explaining to you last night, but I consider all materialistic ideologies to be left wing, include all materialistic form of economics as left wing, so I include capitalism as a left wing form of economics. Well, then right wing economics is the anti-materialistic economic systems.
So here's I think where Aiden kind of right. And you know what? I lost that thought. I'm sorry. I am simultaneously a worse host than AA, but also a better host than AA. What do you think? What do you think, Ray? Am I better or worse than AA?
I mean, almost anything is better than him. So
I like AA. Dude, I've talked to him once. He's like, he can be an arrogant prick, but he's like he knows it.
He doesn't. No, but he doesn't. No, but the thing about that is I have no problem with people who are arrogant pricks, because sometimes maybe I am also that person. But
I'm the most arrogant prick I know.
The issue I have with him is not sticking to his own principles. I mean, I don't just mean principles like political principles. I mean foundational, personal, relational principles, which is basically, for example, he comes out at the beginning and pledges that he doesn't engage in attempts to dox people, but then attempts unsuccessfully to dox me no less than 4 times.
Do you know what's funny?
How does a person do that, but then turn around and still have credibility left? I mean, perhaps he has credibility with people who don't know that he tried to do that, but he would never be able to recoup that credibility with me because he can't turn around and do that. Particularly since the reciprocation was not made the other way around. So, for example, there were 2 occasions on which I could have actually hit back at him in vengeance by doing like some kind of weird doxy thing or whatever. But in both instances, and this was early on in this in the situation in which I knew him, early on, I essentially said, I've identified that there are some people here who have information that could be used to like harm you in some way, like in the physical, right? And so that was resolved. The whole thing was handed back over to him, and so on and so forth. And I essentially upheld the underlying, like, basic live streamer principle of, if you see docs, do not pass docs on to other people and do not read docs. Just return it to the person to whom it belongs, right? So I've always played by those rules, which is why I've never doxed anyone. Even if it literally lands in my lap, I won't do it on principle.
You accidentally doxed me once, but I did not care.
Really? How?
You said,
actually, no, don't tell me how, because obviously you're not just be doing it again.
You said I lived in the Washington, D.C. area, but that's it.
I'm not sure if that was me that would have said that.
Maybe it was another woman who comes.
It had to be someone else, because I don't actually know that you live in that area until you just told me.
There have only been like 4 women who have ever come on this stream.
Yeah, that is probably not me, because I didn't know that piece of information until you just told me it. But no, that probably was not me then, unless I've completely forgotten I've done it. But I don't think that was me. Yeah. But I mean, in terms of that, like, even if I would never deliberately do that to someone. Whereas,
no, I didn't even care.
Like, yeah. Whereas in the case of what Academic Agent has tried to do to people before, like, he will deliberately attempt to do it, and then it's basically up to you to prevent it from succeeding. Luckily, in the cases that involve me or people I care about, for example, like, their attempts have been so far and so wide off the mark that there was nothing I needed to respond with, because they were like out in left field or something. Like, for example, there was like one weird doxing attempt in which the person who was attempting to dox me was like 700 miles off from the location. So I was just like, okay, whatever, right? But the principle is that they should not be attempting these things in the first place. They will never succeed, but they should also not be attempting them, because it violates the fundamental principle of how live streamers should treat each other, essentially. And so that's my fundamental disagreement with him, really. Like, if you cut past all the political stuff, because obviously I don't expect to agree politically with him on anything, given what he believes, right? But if you cut past all of the everything, it really just comes down to the craven doxing attempts and the lying. That's my main issue with him.
Okay, I think you just have like beef with Academic. I like both you guys. Academic Agent.
The beef was based on nothing, right? Because
your guys' beef was so stupid, and I think you guys were both stupid for it. Like,
how is that a both sides thing? I mean, my quote beef with him is that I disagree with him ideologically. His beef with me is that he wants to actually violate the rules of live streaming, essentially, to try to get back at me because I disagree with him ideologically.
If he was trying to dox you, that's kind of an asshole move. But...
That's what I mean. Yeah. So it is not comparable. He never succeeded, obviously, and he cannot succeed. But the point is that it is not an equality thing. Because essentially, I'm being annoying by making arguments. He's trying to be annoying by trying to.
I'm sorry. He said because you're a woman.
I mean, I'm not going to speculate as whether it's misogyny or not, because I mean, obviously, he's also had other. He has like other females he associates with.
Yiz the Eunuch, which I mean, Yiz the Eunuch is like a half female, half male, so
Yiz
that's like
doesn't count. And even Yiz is gonna watch the stream tomorrow. They, she, it, whatever. Doesn't care. Like, we fuck with her sometimes. So I was gonna go. So she has a camping trip this next Friday. I can't go because number 1, I have Masonic stuff. Number 2, I have to do an initiation with my college fraternity. So double secret society stuff, right?
Oh my gosh.
But basically, if you get a sense, you're in the UK. An American college fraternity is a cross between like the Freemasons and a dining club. For boys. Yeah. So, but
that you can live at too.
I don't live there though. I would never live in a frat house. You did though because of cheaper housing. I know.
No, I didn't live there. I was attempting to live there. I would have to move in the next semester, but then I got kicked out.
You were kicked out for being too conservative.
I'm too right wing for their likings. So yeah, that's how I got kicked out.
Too right wing for a college fraternity in Montana.
No, and it was in North Dakota, but
same shit in North Dakota. How can you do that? Like, How? For a fraternity, for a college fraternity in North Dakota, how can you get kicked out for being too much of a conservative?
I mean, I wasn't even identifying as a conservative back then because I already discarded the label because I saw it as, quite frankly, because the conservatives aren't socially conservative at all in the United States. So I hate the title.
They are a little bit, unlike abortion, but that's it.
Like slightly, but otherwise they're not really conservative. So, that's why I started identifying more as like a nationalist, and then I went down the political road of like reaction.
And you abandoned nationalism at one point because you prefer monarchy. So because nationalism is fundamentally anti-monarchy.
Yes, and I
Nationalism. I'm sorry, but I was just going to say nationalism, even though it has its roots in the Treaty of Westphalia, the logical extent of what nationalism evolved into, it is the geopolitical expression of bourgeois republicanism, lowercase r.
Yeah, and that's why I abandoned it because, well, one, I hate everything bourgeois. So
I thought you are bourgeois.
Yeah, well, I come from my father's bourgeois, but we come from an aristocratic family. But his soul is bourgeois.
So what am I for being old Virginia plantation aristocracy? Does that make me bourgeois in your eyes?
Yes, because I only view the warrior as an aristocratic member.
Hey, we were on my dad's side, we were Union sergeants. On my mom's side, we were Confederate colonels.
I'm talking about embracing the warrior spirit as well.
Okay, fair.
Yeah, that's why I admire the knight, but I don't admire the soldier, because a soldier is a contract gun for hire, a mercenary. Well, then a knight is above that. He has that virtue of chivalry. He has that warrior code, that warrior spirit, and he goes out and he actually lives the life of a warrior.
So let's spend this next 15 minutes talking about, I guess, what the point of the stream was initially. Is Donald Trump a socialist, and is that a good or a bad thing? Because I think Trump is, again, not ideologically socialist, but in practice is essentially a socialist. And I say he's a socialist tongue-in-cheek to fuck with boomer cons. I love fucking with boomer cons more than I love fucking with shit libs. Because it is so much fun. I will call them socialists, and they don't even know what socialism is. They are basically socialists on policy without realizing it. But I will call them out on it. They'll be like, "No, America will never be a socialist state." It's like, you are so culturally against that label that you hate it. But on policy, that's what you are. You are a left-wing populist on economics, center-right at best on social issues. If this were based in a lot of ways, it is Trumpism is a revolutionary movement in terms of its epistemological view. Maybe reformist, but not quite revolutionary. I'll take that back. Not quite revolutionary, but more than reformist. And I say that in the epistemological, the ontological, and the metaphysical sense.
I always feel like people are assigning more to what happened there than what actually happened. Because I almost feel like if you woke Trump up in the middle of the night and you shook him, you were like, "What were you trying to do there?" He's not gonna suddenly say, "Oh, I was actually attempting to complete the system of German idealism." He's not gonna say that.
Trump's too much of a retard. Have you seen his work? Okay, he's not as dumb as Herschel Walker, because Herschel Walker actually talks at a kindergarten level. That's been proven, which is hilarious. Herschel Walker is the gift that keeps on giving. Part of me is such a declinist, collapsitarian. I'm not a collapsitarian, but colloquially a collapsitarian, doomerist, black-pilled accelerationist that oh my god, if Herschel Walker got elected, that would be
there should
hilarious.
be
That would be hilarious for America.
There needs to be a whole stream. There needs to be a whole stream on Herschel Walker and what he actually means for America, because there's so much going on there.
You down Tuesday? You down Tuesday at 11 p.m. my time?
Can't do Tuesday. It would have to be I don't know, in the weekend of next week or something.
I can do Friday. Okay. No. I can't do Friday because again I have that secret ritual stuff. So
okay,
2 secret rituals. So
But basically, it can be organized for some time. But basically, Herschel Walker is like a whole. He's like a whole walking parable. Like a book could be written on him about how everything in liberal democracy has sort of culminated in that moment last week. Absolutely the most ridiculous thing we've ever seen.
Herschel Walker is the avatar of America these days.
And the thing is, he manages to encompass like all of the memes from all of the sides. So he's got like the center left stuff going on. He's got the center right doing all of their stuff, and like all of the people who are reacting. And we're talking about the quote unquote normal people who are reacting to these situations as they emerged. Like all of them were actually literal clown memes, and they weren't even aware that they were sort of like part of the whole experience of the carnival. It was just. I mean, the only thing it can really be compared to is the 2019 general election in the UK, where they unironically elected Boris Johnson, who then proceeded to trash the entire country.
Okay. Honestly, Boris Johnson. I like Boris Johnson as a journalist. He was not a terrible journalist, and he was an okay mayor of London, even though that doesn't have any responsibilities at all. But as prime minister, he was a bumbling failure.
Also, it was a predictable bumbling failure as well, because when he was working.
I'm just saying, it's what happened when you're in like a centrist liberal concept, when you're in a centrist liberal establishment metaphysical concept. That's what you get when you basically. Boris Johnson is a case study of what happens when basically a libertarian gets elected into actual national office.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to that,
Biden. He's basically he became the British Joe Biden.
In addition to that, which made it somewhat worse, if you think about it, is the fact that obviously Boris Johnson comes from sort of an aristocratic background. He's
an American also.
He's been to and he also has that, and he's also he went to Eton and so on and so forth. And when he worked in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, there was a clear warning sent out at that time, because during the premiership of Theresa May, he was brought in as FCO, basically Foreign Commonwealth Office.
I didn't even know that.
And during that time, his performance was so bad and so abysmal that the civil service itself kind of broke. Let's say, I suppose it's like an unspoken decorum that the civil service usually won't go on the record and be like, this guy is trash. The civil service broke whatever that unspoken convention of not speaking badly of the ministers were, or whatever, it's to the extent that it exists, and essentially went to the newspapers, anonymously of course, and were like, Boris Johnson attends meetings late. He sleeps in meetings. He is never paying attention. He doesn't make notes. He doesn't care about any of the events that are occurring. He delegates tasks to everyone else. He just walks around in circles and acts like he's in charge. He is fully aware of the fact that he is doing
better
this.
Than Donald Trump. I'm sorry.
He's fully aware. But the thing that made Boris Johnson so incredibly awful as well was that Boris Johnson had the self-awareness to understand that he was doing these things, and yet he continued to do them.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it.
And on top of that, this was then essentially vented to the country through the newspapers, who dutifully reported that the civil service said that Boris Johnson actually hasn't done a single day's work since the time he's been appointed Foreign and Commonwealth Office head. And the electorate was like, yeah, that's the person we want to elect to an even higher office. The guy who never does a day's work.
Okay.
And you think he's entitled to your money.
So I don't know. It's of course not as good as the classic, but you're in the UK. I don't know if you're a citizen or not, but I know you've been there for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how affiliated you are with them culturally speaking. But there was this great show in the '80s called Spitting Image. They did a revival of it recently.
Oh, is that the show with the caricature puppet things?
Yeah. Classic is better, but the new one was pretty good. It got like, I think the reviews on it were too harsh. The new one's pretty funny, but it was making fun of Liz Truss, and she was like,
"Oh, she's also another one of those sort of libertarians thrown to office."
This is her thing. I'm going to get elected as prime minister. I don't know how much power it is, but I imagine it being like Michelle Obama or Elsa from Frozen. It was really funny, yeah.
And the thing is, and of course, there should be a stream on that too. But I mean, the first thing she did was she got into power. She got in, appointed Kwasi Kwarteng as chancellor. The two of them then got together and were like, how are we going to do libertarianism as hard and fast as possible? And they were like, tax cuts. We're taking the 45% top rate of tax and lowering it to 40.
Taxes.
And then, literally lowered taxes for the rich and raised it for the poor, effectively. And began setting about doing all manner of insanity, and then basically they were deeply shocked and surprised when financial markets were like, we didn't want you to actually do that. If you actually do that, you lose our confidence.
Yeah.
So it was like a wake-up call for libertarians, basically. Pound lost so much value in just a few short moments. You can actually watch it happen on screen. If you had like Bloomberg on a one television and like their speech on the other, as soon as they came on the television and announced we're cutting the rate of 45% tax in the top bracket down to 40%, so there is no third tax bracket. There would only be 2 tax brackets in the entire country. As soon as they actually said that, the market began to tank.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I know what you mean.
And they were actually surprised by this because, of course, according to their mythology, what do you mean I cut taxes and the economy get worse? That's impossible. And yet it happened. Almost instantly. And so it was almost like it was like one of those moments that was like so profound in British politics that people are going to remember it for like the next 40 years or something. Like it was like they actually recreated Black Wednesday in the matter of a single speech within minutes of having spoken. Like I never actually thought I would be alive in a Black Wednesday for a second time, but they actually managed to create a second
Is
one.
this really how bad the British Conservative Party? Because the British Conservative Party is still better than our Republicans, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. I mean, if it were the Republican Party, it'd probably be worse. They'd probably have done even worse. But
I unironically like Nigel Farage, though. I'm not gonna lie.
I mean, he is also one of those libertarian types. I mean, if he were placed in that position, he would have just done exactly what Liz Truss did.
I unironically want to see the entire parliament dissolved by Charles.
Of course you do. You know, there's a play that was written about it called Charles III.
Oh yes, I know.
No, but it's
and it was
just
glorious.
it's not relevant in terms of its political context anymore. But I heard it wasn't a terrible play. It was written by one of the guys who's a writer on The Crown, and The Crown is a pretty great show. So, not gonna lie, it's fiction, of course. And it kind of I feel like it has a Republican bias that sneaks up at times. But I'm thoroughly looking forward to season 5 with Jonathan Pryce in a month.
Yeah, I dropped off of The Crown around I watched season 3, and then I don't go on Netflix either because I don't endorse Netflix. So
I'm just saying, okay, Gillian Murphy, aka Scully, was she Scully on X-Files? I think so. She played a great Margaret Thatcher. No,
yeah,
no,
I didn't
no.
I didn't get there, so I don't know that part of the show.
I don't know how far that show is going to extend, and of course, I haven't been watching it either. But I think the part you all need to look out for, if it goes far enough to reach there, is if they choose to include it, is the infamous moment when John Major is standing at the dispatch box and is confronted by Tony Blair, who leans in toward him and calls him weak, weak, weak. That's the moment you want to look for, because that was the moment when essentially he dispatched the Conservative Party to the wilderness for the next however many years that was, 13 years. And this, I think, it was literally just a one-off dismissive comment where it was obviously it was on television because obviously it's always aired, and it was like, he just gets up and looks at him and says, "You know what you are? You're weak, weak, weak. You see, there's one very big difference between the two of us. I lead my party, he follows his," and then everyone begins like jumping up and down as they do in Parliament, and that was the end.
Why did I call her Gillian Murphy? I meant Gillian Anderson.
And I think that Blair actually did touch on something very, very key there about the way the Conservative Party is run, even today, which is that they're always chasing polls, and they're always just like essentially cringing and hoping to be supported and hoping to be propped up in some way. Whereas during that time period, the Labour Party didn't seem to have that issue. The Labour Party were just coming up with policies, making up their own stuff and being like, "You will believe this." And it would happen. And so that was like the power difference. One of them had more psychological command over people than the other did.
One had the triumph of the will, essentially.
Yeah, basically. I mean, obviously the Labour Party hasn't had that since. I mean, the last time they had it was perhaps, when Jeremy Corbyn was in charge in the run into 2019, because obviously he had very strong beliefs and he didn't compromise on them, and essentially he would make policy and then tell everyone else they need to get in line.
I respect Corbyn, but people, even on the right and the left, disagree with me, and I say this half jokingly, that he's Oswald Mosley 2.0.
I mean, that's what they treated him like. They were like, "This is the
They
worst
were.
thing we've ever seen in the country," or whatever, and they began
I
exploding
think that's
around
kind of
the
an
hall.
insult to Sir
think-
Oswald Mosley. In all
think
honesty,
no. I say no, but my joke on Twitter, I got ratioed by British leftists, but I was like, Jeremy Corbyn's basically an anti-Semitic version of Oswald Mosley.
I mean, I'm sure that they would have come in and argued that Oswald Mosley was an anti-Semitic version of Oswald Mosley.
Oswald Mosley wasn't as anti-Semitic as a lot of people said, honestly.
At any rate, we are coming up now to the time when we said we would stop, so we should probably.
So, yeah, would you guys like to potentially take this to the Discord? If you guys have no time, that's completely fine.
I've run out of time completely.
I've got a little bit of time.
All right, so yeah, you Kilhoon, you and I will go there. Ray needs to get some sleep because she's somewhere.
She's in British time.
Yeah, I'm in the wrong time zone for this.
Ray is like the epitome of a night owl.
Yeah.
So either way, thank you guys both so much for coming on. I know we didn't talk that much about Trump actually being a socialist.
Yeah,
but I think
we could have touched on social issues more, but I think that Aiden wasn't diving into those. But I was waiting to see if he would, but he didn't.
I think we just didn't have enough time, so
Yeah.
we might need to do like a stream similar to this one to delve more into that. But I do think Aiden's perspective was interesting and one that I really was not aware of. Again, Gadsden Socialism. He's already sent a tweet out saying they should start calling it Gadsden Socialism.
Wow.
So I might have started a new hashtag. Who knows?
If it goes badly, you're entirely responsible.
I am entirely responsible for creating the movement that is going to create Caesarism in the United States. That is my legacy. That is the politicrat's legacy.
Well,
Anyway.
like I said, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump power combo.
That's scary, but I can respect it in a very dark way. Anyway, either of you guys have any last minute thoughts to say or?
Subscribe to my channel at the Darth Kilhoon channel. I know I don't make content regularly, but I attempt to make content with my busy schedule.
Ray, when are you starting your live stream up? It's been 2 years. You keep
Yeah,
saying
it's been ages. I mean, I keep saying I'm going to restart it soon, and then I don't do it. But this time, probably soon, because I think we kind of reached the point where I know what I'm doing now. The whole thing has to be reorientated.
I'm going to force you, and you're going to need to have me on your first stream.
Maybe. We will see.
See you in 2 years, then.
LOL, I don't think it will take that long. But yeah, I mean, at some point before the end of this year, we'll be restarting. Don't worry.
Okay. And of course, Saturnalia stream on the 17th of December, as always.
Okay.
As we have for the past 3 years. But anyway, thank you everybody for tuning in. Of course, both Darth Kilhoon, Ray Marasamy, and the other two gentlemen who left earlier, Aiden and whatever Ms. Izian's name is, Ms. Izian Chicago. I don't care. I'm good enough friends with him to shit on him. So, either way, thank you for tuning in. Thank you guys both for coming on. I'll try to have another stream possibly by the end of the week. I've promised scripted content, but I've been too lazy. But on that note, again, thank you for coming on, and I will see you all